it has emboldened other governments to go even further.
He's such a coward. God, he's such a coward. This is the most, like, rent-seeking, profiteering, like, spineless dude. Can you please explain what was so wrong about what Zuck said? Yeah, so...
The message is clear. Get rid of the fact-checkers that Trump doesn't like. Reflect the tipping point of the win, as Zuckerberg called it. And remember, most voters use Facebook or Instagram. So these changes will shape the information, and whether it's fact-checked or not, that most people get in this coming era. It is telling and should be noted when powerful companies proclaim they are ditching fact-checking pursuant to a political agenda. Now, studies had shown the fact-checking that is being ditched, that I just showed you, and I'm going to show you more of what Zuckerberg says, it did work. It cut down on belief in falsehoods. Zuckerberg cites Elon Musk's X in his announcement, and he cites Trump. So this isn't one of those times where we have to sort of wonder, is it a coincidence and the timing? No, Zuckerberg is making it very clear what this is for.
Do you think he's directly responding to the threats that you have made in the past? Probably.
Facebook acknowledged that when it came to misinformation going into 2016, it wasn't a million or two people. It was over 100 million Americans who were exposed to foreign election propaganda.
Calling women household objects now permitted on Facebook after Meta updated its guidelines. Meta on Tuesday announced sweeping changes to how it moderates content that will roll out in the coming months, including doing away with professional fact-checking. The company also quietly updated its hateful conduct policy, adding new types of content users can post to the platform, effective immediately. Users are now allowed to, for example, refer to women as household objects or property, or transgender or non-binary people as it, according to a section of the policy prohibiting such speech that was crossed out. Apparently, the Zuck made a statement on this.
Hey everyone, I want to talk about something important today, because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political, but there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation. These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly.
Oh, wait, what? Terrorism and child exploitation, very bad. Drugs? Is that really in the same type of... Is that really in the same class of thing there? Okay. Jesus Christ.
But there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation. These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly. So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact-checkers and replace them with community notes, similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected...
Yeah, why would we have cringe fact-checkers when we could brigade community note systems? Hell yes.
In 2016, the legacy media wrote non-stop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact-checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created,
Examples?
especially in the US. So over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system. Second, we're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse. What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far. So I want to make sure that people can share their beliefs and experiences on our platforms. Third, we're changing how we enforce our policies to reduce the mistakes that account for the vast majority of censorship on our platforms. We used to have filters that scanned for any policy violation. Now, we're going to focus those filters on tackling illegal and high-severity violations. And for lower-severity violations, we're going to rely on someone reporting an issue before we take action. The problem is that the filters make mistakes, and they take down a lot of content that they shouldn't. So by dialing them back, we're going to dramatically reduce the amount of censorship on our platforms. We're also going to tune our content filters to require much higher confidence before taking down content. The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down. Fourth, we're bringing back civic content. For a while, the community asked to see less politics because it was making people stressed, so we stopped recommending these posts. But it feels like we're in a new era now, and we're starting to get feedback that people want to see this content again. So we're gonna
Thank God. I was worried because one time I clicked on a Jordan Peterson post on Facebook and I didn't get recommended 400 other casts with Joe Rogan and Eric and Brett Weinstein and all the other. Thank God now I can go down that hole. Yes.
We're going to start phasing this back into Facebook, Instagram, and Threads while working to keep the communities friendly and positive. Fifth, we're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California and our...
What the fuck? Not the California moderation teams.
Our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California.
Please say it to Austin, Texas. Please just say to Texas. Please say it. Please say to Austin, Texas. Please, 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 please.
Yeah. And our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas.
All right, I'm outie. I'll be back tomorrow. Have fun.
We're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas. As we work to promote free expression, I think that it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there is less concern about the bias of our teams. Finally, we're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more. The US has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there.
What is the significance of moving to Texas? I don't really get it, but I'm definitely missing something. Austin and Texas is seen as like new MAGA, kind of. They represent like the cutting edge MAGA ideology that's also like cool and hip with all like the Austin podcasters and everything. And Texas is like, they're not just country. They're country with laptops. They're cowboys with computers. They're serious MAGA with iPhones and AirPods. It's just like that's just like what Texas has kind of become the symbol of, basically.
Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down.
You ever heard of a little thing called the Patriot Act? Or like, what do you mean? Like, what do we... I also really don't like, this is just my anti-American bias showing. I really don't like it when Americans, like, say Europe, like European countries, or like Latin America, or like, give me some examples. Which country are you talking about? Because these countries are different. Which countries are you talking about? Give me an example of what you're talking about. Like,
for a while,
this is a thing for X a while back. Yes, I know. He's talking specifically about the reference is the, oh, was it Bolivia? Somebody went after Elon Musk on X for some particular thing. I don't remember what it was about, but it was asked, oh, was it Brazil?
The community asked to see less politics because it was making people stressed, so we stopped recommending these posts. But it feels like we're in a new era now, and we're starting to get feedback that people want to see this content again. So we're going to start phasing this back into Facebook, Instagram, and Threads while working to keep the communities friendly and positive. Fifth, we're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas. As we work to promote free expression, I think that it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there is less concern about the bias of our teams. Finally, we're going to work...
Like, that's... Oh, so if you just... So you can't have it... What is the implicit message there? Any team in California is just not trustworthy in tech anymore? Is that the implied bias?
This work in places where there's less concern about the bias of our teams. Finally, we're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more. The US has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there. Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down. China has censored our apps from even working in the country. The only way that we can push back on this global trend is with the support of the US government. And that's why it's been so difficult over the past 4 years when even the US government has pushed for censorship. By going after us and other American companies, it has emboldened other governments to go even further.
He's such a coward. God, he's such a coward. This is the most, like, rent-seeking, profiteering, like, spineless dude.
But now we have the opportunity to restore free expression, and I'm excited to take it. It'll take time to get this right, and these are complex systems, they're never going to be perfect. There's also a lot of illegal stuff that we still need to work very hard to remove. But the bottom line is that after years of having our content moderation work focused primarily on removing content, it is time to focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our systems, and getting back to our roots about giving people voice. I'm looking forward to this next chapter. Stay good out there, and more to come soon.
He hired Dana White to look over it. Yeah. You should watch Asmongold react to this. His flit on how he felt about Facebook changed with every word. Oh, I watched this. How far did I make it? I made it 12 minutes and I couldn't do it anymore. Can you please explain what was so wrong about what Zuck said? Yeah, so Zuckerberg, I guess maybe you just don't realize it if you're on the left or if you're not like super politically plugged in, but all of this messaging is like messaging for MAGA, basically. Like all of this messaging is basically saying like, I am going to be a loyal Trump subject. Like that's what this is for. So like,
I want to talk about something important today, because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political.
So governments and legacy media
Push to censor more and
have pushed to censor more and more. So this is an attack on the left mainstream media, and it's an attack on Biden's administration, right? And we know because of the Twitter files, right? Even though none of that actually proved any of that, but
more. A lot of this is clearly political, but there's also a lot of legitimate.
A lot of this is clearly political in nature, right? Remember, all of the censorship and everything done, none of it was done in good faith. None of it was done because people were trying to figure out, you know, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. None of it was done because of any concept of reducing harm, even if misguided or incorrect. All of this was done just to be, political in nature. That's it.
But there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there: drugs, terrorism, child exploitation.
I don't know how conspiratorial I want to be, but I'll go maximum conspiracy because at this point, these guys are all, it's literally a conspiracy. These people are all now working together, right? Drugs, terrorism, and child exploitation, all of these things just feel like virtue signaling to the right. They don't like drugs, obviously. Terrorism is spooky, obviously. Child exploitation is this huge, weird, conservative, obsessive talking point over illegal immigration. What was that stupid, the movie they made? Was it The Sound of Freedom? Is that what I'm thinking of?
These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly. So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural
too many mistakes and too much censorship. Notice how, like, the explanation that he just gave there doesn't, like, really qualify for the loaded censorship he's using. Like, if he had a moderating thing that was making mistakes, would we call that censorship? Maybe in effect, but I don't think we would describe it as such. But this is the signaling is important. There was censorship, political censorship, right?
Elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms.
Free expression and freedom of speech is always the calling card for conservatives. When they say freedom of expression or freedom of speech, they just mean that they don't want to get banned no matter what. That's always the calling card for that.
Specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes.
So fact checkers are seen as bad because the Trump administration lies so much, and because conservative and MAGA are kind of in a different world. All fact checkers are seen as being politically biased, right? They're all liberal, they're all crazy, they're all wacky. This is just nobody on the right likes fact checkers anymore. Community notes are based because Elon Musk did them on X. That's it.
Similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially.
So, common talking point. Okay, well, sure, maybe this is the Russian propaganda, right? Sure, maybe Trump does lie and the Republicans do lie sometimes, sure, but so does the left. The left lies, and how are we supposed to trust you when you guys have messed up? You guys have made mistakes, so it's destroying the trust. Remember, the trust is always destroyed by by somebody making a mistake, not by the other people who are obsessively talking about those mistakes over and 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 over again, right? It's always like the framing always lives how conservatives basically want the framing to live.
And have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system. Second, we're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse.
So get rid of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are out of touch with mainstream discourse. Is you can go back to being super anti-immigrant and make fun of trans people, because we realize that like a lot of our users and a lot of conservatives want to do that, basically.
Just out of touch with mainstream discourse. What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far. So I want to make sure that people can share their beliefs and experiences on our platforms. Third, we're changing how we enforce our policies to reduce the mistakes that account for the vast majority of censorship on our platforms. We used to have filters that stand for any policy violation. Now, we're going to focus those filters on tackling illegal and high-severity violations. And for lower-severity violations, we're going to rely on someone reporting an issue before we take action. The problem is that the filters make mistakes, and they take down a lot of content that they shouldn't. So by dialing them back, we're going to dramatically reduce the amount of censorship on our platforms.
And this change isn't necessarily bad, I don't think. I don't think there's anything being signaled there.
We're also going to tune our content filters to require much higher confidence before taking down content. The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down. Fourth, we're bringing back civic content. For a while, the community asked to see less politics because it was making people stressed, so we stopped recommending these posts. But it feels like we're in a new era now, and we're starting to get feedback that people want to see this content again. So we're going to start phasing this back into Facebook, Instagram, and Threads while working to keep the communities friendly and positive. Fifth, we're going to move our trust and safety and content moderation teams out of California, and our US-based content review is going to be based in Texas.
So Texas is the new base place. It's where all the cool podcasts are. Austin is just like the new awesome conservative place to be. And California is woke and stupid and lame and trans and not good. So this is just a...
As we work to promote free expression, I think it will help us build trust to do this work in places where there's less concern about the bias of our teams.
Because if you're in California, you can't possibly be unbiased. You're going to be always like a crazy woke SJW cuck.
Finally, we're going to work with President Trump to push back on governments around the world that are going after American companies and pushing to censor more.
These are just companies that have been mean to Elon Musk. We're going to fight them alongside Trump to help defend our fellow billionaires in the United States.
The US has the strongest constitutional protections for free expression in the world. Europe has an ever-increasing number of laws institutionalizing censorship and making it difficult to build anything innovative there.
Europe is cringe. European restrictions on tech and what they did to Apple and the poor USB-C port and everything else is like cringe and evil and mean, and we need to fight back against the Europeans.
Latin American countries have secret courts that can order companies to quietly take things down. China has censored apps from even working in the country. The only way that we can push back on this global trend is with the support of the US government. And that's why it's been so difficult over the past 4 years when even the US government has pushed for censorship.
Remember, Biden bad, Democrats bad. The Democrats and Biden have pushed for censorship. Very bad, not good.
But going after us and other American companies...
No, going after us and going after other American companies. I don't even know what that means. How many people has Trump sued at this point?
It has emboldened other governments to go even further. But now we...
Because the Biden administration was... I don't even know what they did, actually. I don't know what it could be referring to. Somehow companies in the United States censoring people on COVID or immigration, misinformation, or whatever, has emboldened other governments to take bad actions against...
It has emboldened other governments to go even further. But now we have the opportunity to restore free expression, and I'm excited to take it. It'll take time to get this right, and these are complex systems. They're never going to be perfect. There's also a lot of illegal stuff that we still need to work very hard to remove. But the bottom line is that after years of having our content moderation work focused primarily on removing content, it is time to focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our systems, and getting back to our roots about giving people voice. I'm looking forward to this next chapter. Stay good out there, and more to come soon.
Do you think it's legitimately MAGA or just trying to compete with X and being the base right platform? And it's probably just trying to get concessions from Trump and trying to get more crazy conservatives onto the platform, basically. But, I mean, it's kind of... I mean, the effect is going to be the same regardless.
This is what they're like. You know, I don't know if you've read my book or not, but this is what they're like.
I did, yeah.
This is exactly the way Mark was, always was. And he's like, I called him, he's kind of a sad weather vane. He just sort of tips and goes along depending on what's in his self-interest. And
you think Pierce might pivot to glazing Democrats now that Trump's president? No, it's just he'll follow the online audiences, I would imagine. He's got a formula right now that he iterates on, and he's like successfully kind of like captured the whole like far-right outrage machine, and so now they've reverse captured him, and it's just going to be like basically serving the slop back to them like the entire media sphere does online.
this is what he is like. He's always found it irritating that he has to have responsibility for anything or consequences anywhere in the world, and doesn't consider himself a publisher. And so he'll do whatever it takes at whatever time it takes. So I find him disloyal to almost everyone, including back when he threw Trump off the platform. I just don't trust him with anything. And in 4 years' time, he'll switch again if it's in his best interests, financial interests, really.
I mean, he wouldn't be the first media titan to go where the power and money wind blows. But on the detail of his statement yesterday, it was a pretty extraordinary reversal.
Well, it was also full of... It was a little mendacious on a number of things. By the way, there are a lot of conservative fact checkers in that fact-checking situation. And many years ago, he talked about how AI was going to solve this, and now it's community notes that's going to solve this. It's a multifaceted problem. And the real issue is the site is built for malevolent players, and sometimes governments, sometimes people, to do whatever it want on the system. It's a system that's impossible to fact-check. It's a system that has no guardrails on it, and it's a system in which he uses the First Amendment when it suits him. I actually don't think he's read it, even though it's short and first. Governments shall make no law. Like, it doesn't say Facebook shall make no law. He makes rules and then he breaks them. And he says, with Alex Jones, he did that with all kinds of things. And then he reverses himself. Holocaust deniers was a good example. He told me in an interview, and we got, I was like, well, he said, Holocaust deniers don't mean to lie. And I said, well, that's kind of the definition of a Holocaust denier. But, and then 2 years later, reversed it. And then who knows if he's going to, now he seems to have reversed it again. And so I don't think he has any particular principles or values that are lasting. He can do whatever he wants because he's king of that.
Well, yeah, to a point, I guess he can. Dave Smith, what did you make of it?
He's king of that site. Piers, he can't be fired ever. His children can't be fired. Just let me just be clear. He has total control of that site.
But you're talking to the wrong accent when it comes to kings. We like our kings. We like kings.
I know, you have a better king. I'd rather have Prince Charles running that thing.
We believe in maniacal power. So,
yes.
Dave Smith, I mean, I found it jaw-dropping, to be honest, notwithstanding a lot of what Cara just said, that she wasn't remotely surprised by the wind blowing, but to actually see him, trot down to Mar-a-Lago to kiss the Trump ring, as it was put, and to then do really what turned out to be half mea culpa and half screeching U-turn over pretty much everything that Facebook had stood for was pretty spectacular to watch.
Yeah, it was incredible. And, I want to be clear. I think this is...
Always listen to how these guys that lied about being centrists, always listen to how they talk about, like, Trump and the mega stuff. It's always like, oh, yeah, I'm so happy. Like, it's so strange that they... Did Dave Smith admit for the first time, was it next to me when he was cowarding the entire conversation? He was like, I think I have to support Donald Trump, to the surprise of literally nobody. Nobody is surprised about this.
For was pretty spectacular to watch.
Yeah, it was incredible, and you know, I want to be clear. I think this is a really positive thing.
Yeah, I
don't
do.
believe in yeah. So like, I kind of want to be happy about it, but all of my instincts are just to rip the guy, because especially because he doesn't acknowledge any. There's no acknowledgement that he did something wrong or that he's changed his mind on this. It's kind of this just vague, like, oh, I created this to give people a voice, and a lot of people think this stuff went too far. And like, yes, it reminds me of, you know, I debated Chris Cuomo last year, and it reminds me of him coming out and saying like, hey, you guys, you know, this ivermectin stuff isn't horse dewormer. It turns out it's people medicine, and you're like, yeah, that's what we were all saying at the time, in my world at least, and we got a lot of abuse for that. At one point, I do think it's worth just pointing out what happened over these years, even though I think there's a very positive change.
Oh, now it's time for a disfactual accounting of history by Dave Smith, where we lie about every single thing, cite to absolutely nothing, and misrepresent the entire historical record. And by historical record, I mean within the last 8 years, in order to suck off Donald Trump again. Oh boy. Also, the whole reason why Zuckerberg doesn't want to take accountability is because the messaging right now isn't so much that the media companies have messed up, or at least the alternative media companies messed up. The messaging is that it was Biden's fault. Biden was the one doing it. That's why Zuckerberg doesn't want to take accountability. Because if Zuckerberg takes accountability, then it takes away some of the accountability from the Democrats. The message can't be that Twitter or Facebook made mistakes. The message is the FBI and the DOJ made them do it.
You know, I was just playing on my show the other day, a video clip, I'm sure all of you guys have seen it, but Mark Zuckerberg blatantly admitted that both Facebook and the FBI interfered in the 2020 election on the Joe Rogan Experience. And, you know, for all of the news coverage, and to some degree rightfully so.
Post the evidence, again, remember also, like detailed reports from the FBI, from the DOJ, from investigations, from studies, none of these things matter. It's all fake news. The studies that show that right-wing information was amplified on platforms doesn't matter. Fake news. You know, leaked emails, none of these things matter. None of these things matter. But if the CEO of the company, who also, by the way, stands to gain a whole bunch by saying the things he's about to say, comes out and sides with the current administration, and then the current popular move towards that administration, crazy that he would come out and say these things. But there's like, we don't even stop for 1 microsecond to second guess his motivations or anything. It's astounding to me. That's astounding to me.
So over the last 4 years, about January 6th, about some of Trump's claims of the election that him and his lawyers were really never able to demonstrate at all. But how about that admission that the FBI came and told Facebook, be prepared for a Russian dump that's coming soon. And then when the laptop came, you had 50 plus intelligence officers signing onto this letter saying that this is the Russian disinformation. And he admitted to censoring people for that. This is like blatant.
Just remember that letter that was publicly published, right? That was after, like, companies like Twitter had already put the laptop story back online. The 50 letters or whatever, that didn't, the 50 whatever people signed letter, that didn't come before, that came after the laptop story, but...
Election interference by the FBI and one of the biggest tech companies out there. I mean, you know, I would think if you're going to reverse that, it would also come along with like an apology and some admission of what you were a part of.
That just nothing he said. There's not a shred of evidence for any of this, other than Zuckerberg going out and cucking himself out with these public statements now. But no evidence, nothing leaked, nothing published by Zuckerberg, who would have access, by the way, to all of these emails, to all of this. Zuckerberg could very easily publish any of this information, I would imagine, or at least reference it. But it's always just like this vague bullshit that MAGA sloppers like Dave Smith love to...
You know, he says he created the site to give people a voice. You robbed your fellow Americans of their voice in a very important, crucial point in American history.
Yeah, I mean, look, I was a New York Post columnist at the time that all went down with their exclusive on Hunter Biden's laptop, which turned out to be a completely genuine story, and certainly wasn't rushed.
We're going to hear this Hunter Biden laptop genuine story. Do you think in a single time in this entire thing, they're going to bring up the fact that the Burisma investigation started because of... that started because of this guy, this informant who lied about everything involving Burisma? Because this came out like not even a month ago. Alexander Smirnov entered his plea to a felony charge in connection with the bogus story, which was about the phony bribery scheme involving President Joe Biden and his son Hunter that became central to the Republican impeachment inquiry in Congress. But this is what kicked off the whole Burisma stuff. It was all built on a lie. But we all knew that because the Republicans investigated this for the better part of the last decade and found nothing. That's why there are no charges. That's why we only have these weird tax things. There's nothing. But I hope we don't bring that up a single time here.
Russian disinformation. And the way that all played out was quite extraordinary and pretty terrifying. See that the New York Post...
Although, guys, come on. Look, tech companies make mistakes the way publishing companies make.
But that wasn't a mistake, Carol, was it?
I mean,
it wasn't a mistake. They actually... Hang on. Hang on, my point. They actually banned the New York Post X account completely.
Yes, they did.
If they didn't take down that...
Do you think that he's going to bring up that it was for less than 24 hours, the timeline? Do you think that'll ever be brought up? It won't. People were saying this woman is crazy. I don't know anything about this woman. I don't think I disagree with anything she's actually said so far. I didn't disagree with any of her opening, but I can't tell if she's slanted in one way or another, but I don't think I disagree with anything. But yeah, remember, no mistakes. Everything is done intentionally. Everything is done malevolently. Everything is evil. All of this is, yeah.
A true story. I mean, that is the most blatant attack on free speech I've ever seen.
But it's not free speech. It's not a government institution. Companies do that. Disney didn't put out a movie in China because the Chinese...
They have the counter for this. Dave... Pierce is going to try to say it doesn't matter here, but either Dave or Tim is going to come to his rescue and come to Trump's rescue and say, actually, sorry, it was government interference because the only reason they did it is because the FBI threatened them implicitly to do so. One of these guys will save Pierce here and saying...
Make it right, though, doesn't it?
Of course not, but it's not, you're equating Facebook. You're equating Facebook or Twitter with the government. It is not a public square.
No, I'm not.
It certainly was not. Listen, I was not equating Facebook and the FBI, and I think it is reasonable to point out that a lot of these big tech companies were under duress, really, since Donald Trump won in 2016. All the heads were hauled in front of Congress and threatened up and down if they didn't get this misinformation problem under control. But is the claim here that those intelligence officers made a mistake and really thought this was Russian disinformation and then realized Hunter Biden's laptop?
Like, again, this is the normalization of the crazy. Imagine, like, what he's just said, he's just turned on its head. Like, what happened, right? Imagine somebody looks at my Snap map, okay? And they see that I was in Omaha, Nebraska, and then they see that I was in New York City the same day. And they look at you, and they're like, okay, well, we see how far Steven moved. Obviously, he teleported. And the other person's like, no, he probably flew in a plane. And the guy's like, are you going to tell me that thousands of pounds of aluminum and engines overcame gravity and flew through the sky? It's like his statement here. Are you going to tell me that all of these people working in intelligence thought that there was a chance that Donald Trump, the guy who had publicly already glazed Putin, had already publicly called for Hillary's 10,000 emails to be released, who had people in his cabinet, or not cabinet, I'm sorry, his what do you call it, campaign election team, people like Roger Stone that were literally working alongside Russian operatives? You're going to tell me that these people genuinely thought there could be some kind of Russian interference, and not instead my theory, which is way more believable, that all of the intelligence agencies were in cahoots with each other and they were all working in a malicious way. Now keep in mind that not only does his story have zero evidence, there's evidence for the other story that literally came out from people who were pro-Trump, right? The Durham report, I think, is the one I referenced that dug through the FBI. Found like, yeah, there's probably kind of like political bias here and there needs to be more checking on stuff. That was like the scathing review. Not that people were maliciously working to lie against the Trump administration, right? Like, but his story somehow gets to be presented here as like, oh, you're going to tell me that, that these people made a mistake? And it's not obvious that there was a massive, huge global conspiracy top down through all of our federal government and all of the social medias and all of the, like,
that those intelligence officers made a mistake and really thought this was Russian disinformation.
And also, how dare you, you cowardly little spineless cuckworm? How are you going to sit here and say that? How are you going to sit here and say there was this grand conspiracy and then not implicate Trump at all? You're going to tell me this conspiracy was so huge and so grand and involved all of our intelligence agencies and involved all the different like line members and all the heads of these agencies, but the head of the FBI, Donald Trump, if you go far up enough, right, didn't know? How is this conspiracy so grand, but it just stopped right there, right at the head of the FBI? How? What? Like, we're not going to think for a second about it? Because you better believe that if it was Biden, or if it was Harris, or if it was Clinton, or if it was Obama, that this would have been, he would have been personally involved directing all of this, right? Like, hello?
Is our government,
Hunter Biden's laptop?
Our government should be talking. Go ahead.
Tim, no, let Cara finish up, then I'll bring you in, Tim.
The government should constantly be talking to lots of companies because there are disinformation campaigns from Iran.
Okay, never mind. I don't know who this lady is. She's about to get bullied like crazy on this panel. I hate that, like, this goes back to the normalization thing. It feels like if I were to give this opinion, I've already lost 80% of the audience. I've probably lost 20% of the audience on my choices. But, like, any reasonably intelligent person would say, social media companies are massive. They have huge power in the United States. Of course, there should obviously be some communication back and forth between our intelligence agencies and these massive social media like companies. That's obviously true. But that feels like an opinion that you wouldn't even be able to fight for. Like people would just automatically already, like there's nothing you could say to convince somebody else. Like that's such an obviously true thing.
Bring you in, Tim.
The government should constantly be talking to lots of companies because there are disinformation campaigns from Iran, Russia. You can't pretend that China's not all up in our...
Like, look at these guys laughing. They don't believe this. Disinformation from foreign actors? Excuse me. Let me introduce you to a well-known disinformationer, Leah Thomas. These are the real threats, okay? Have you seen the drag queens at the local library? Like, look at them laugh. Foreign enemies, a foreign interference. Sorry, only USA does that. Now, you notice that Dave Smith here is laughing and Tim Pool's not. That's because Dave Smith is still on the Kremlin payroll. He hasn't gotten busted yet for whatever foreign bullshit-ass money that he hasn't been caught with yet, and Tim Pool has, so it's not as funny for him, but Dave still thinks this is all like really fucking hilarious because his foreign owners are still supporting everything he says.
To lots of companies because there are disinformation campaigns from Iran, Russia. You can't pretend that China's not all up in our grill. You just can't. You just can't. And there should be discussions between government and companies. They're going to occur by the way they've been...
Let's see. And then how does Dave Smith talk out of this? Because I don't think he'll ever directly say... He has one of two... He's got one of two chairs that he can sit in, basically, while he watches his own country getting asked by Donald Trump. He can either sit in the chair and hold up the sign that says, well, America does it worse, or he can sit in the other chair. Oh, no, there's two chairs in the first chair. It's America does it worse, or America does it to itself worse than anybody else does it. And then the other chair is the... Yeah, maybe they interfere, but everybody does, and it's not a big deal. These are the one of the two chairs that he wants to crawl towards right now. Let's see.
Been occurring since the beginning of time, way back when. Go watch Oppenheimer. There's discussions happening all the time on all levels between companies. The question is, what is pressure and what is important discussions that these companies, because they are the nexus of all these information systems.
Oh my God. One of the biggest complaints that I have with conspiracy theories is that it takes away oxygen from real conversations, okay? I don't know if I would agree with her on everything or not, but what she just said, and it sucks because this is an important conversation. What does count as pressure, right? And there are legitimate questions to ask. If the FBI sends you a message and they say, hey, there might be some issues with this, and you know that the current administration might feel a way about a thing, and you know that that information seems to align with that, and you've got decisions to make, that's a good question. What does count as pressure? What should that communication look like? What should the accountability mechanisms be? These are really good questions. But we'll never, ever, we're not going to spend any time on this show talking about that. Everything she's saying right now is wasted because it's going to be mixed in with the MAGA slop. And the problem is that having a conversation with the MAGA slop involved is like adding diarrhea to a mixer of the best like milkshake you could ever make in the world. It doesn't matter. It's just going to taste like shit.
Should be having, and what are the guardrails against government overreaching? I am all for stopping government overreach. I did a great interview with Edward Snowden about this issue. Perhaps the way he did it wasn't right, but what the government was doing was wrong. They fixed it. There should be guardrails around these things. The question is how it's done. But what happens is there's a fever dream on the left and a fever dream on the right of what's occurring, and it's a little less nefarious. I think that Facebook, unfortunately, occupies a far too important role in news distribution as a kind of a monopoly, and that's the problem we have going forward. It's a private company that's determining what everybody sees, and they're going to not just make mistakes. We're at the behest of Mark Zuckerberg's obviously incompetent ability to decide what's right and wrong.
Okay.
Should he? But...
Let me bring Tim in. You've been waiting patiently. Tim, your response.
Free speech is a principle. When we say that Facebook...
Tim has no principles.
Tim Pool defends Destiny's ban.
Crazy, the free speech advocate?
There's no way. This must be taken out of... This is the part where they try to manipulate you for being a good person into letting evil succeed.
Huh. Weird. I thought he was a free speech absolutist.
Well, not if you're evil.
Oh.
You have to suppress Satan.
And who decides if you're evil? Tim Pool does.
Tim Pool.
Absolutely based. Tim doesn't understand anything about free speech. I'm not even convinced that he's an American citizen. I don't know if these guys are all like, fucking salt or whatever. What's that? Where they're like children that are like bred in other countries and then they end up being swapped out for American citizens as like secret like sleeper agents or whatever. They always show themselves, they always tell on themselves too. As soon as they start bringing up like the First Amendment or bringing up like freedom of speech, like these people have no concept of anything about the country or America or freedom of speech or anything. These are like sleeper agents against the Republic.
Let me bring Tim in. You've been waiting patiently. Tim, your response.
Free speech is a principle. When we say that Facebook, X, Twitter, whatever platform is silencing free speech, we are not talking about the First Amendment. The First Amendment protects multiple rights, of which one of those is free speech. So this constant conflation of a private company isn't violating your First Amendment. I'm not going to bring up the First Amendment. I'm going to go on a platform, I'm going to express my ideas and share news, and if they silence me, they are violating my free speech. Now,
like in response to that, she should just start screeching at the top of her lungs. Just scream. She should just be screaming. And she should do it until they mute her mic. And then when they unmute her mic, she should say, was he just attacking my freedom of speech? Is this good freedom of speech? Is that what you mean when you say freedom of speech? That every single person has an equal right to every single platform to say every single thing they want at every single point in time? Or...
More importantly, this argument about, you mentioned there's a fever dream on the left and the right. I want to make one thing clear. Mark Zuckerberg coming out and saying that now we're going to have more free speech or whatever it is he's trying to say, this is not a pendulum swing. This is not the weather vane. Certainly, I do believe the man is just bending the knee to whatever power structure he sees. But if we were actually going to see a pendulum swing in the other direction, they would keep the fact-checking program, ban the liberal news outlets, and only allow conservative outlets to fact-check posts on Facebook. When you look at all sides, when you look at ground news, the majority of U.S. fact-checkers had a liberal bias, and only one, which was associated with Daily Caller, was considered to be conservative-leaning.
So this is just like the standard 75 IQ or Russian agent talking point that, like, yeah, most of the fact checkers leaned left. Well, what if one side is lying more than the other? I mean, what do you do then?
And when numerous outlets on the right made attempts to get access through Pointer to the fact-checking system, they were denied.
I'm torching the bridge or any concept of a bridge ever. But, like, bridge is totally burned.
What I remember well is high-level ideas. That's just how my brain works, for better or for worse.
Okay, if this is the case, don't waste your time studying history, and don't pretend to study history, because you're not learning history at that point. History is a collection of names and dates and places, and then a chronology and a story that relates these in some way. It could relate them to wars or diplomacy or marriages or domestic conflict or economics or trade. There's a million ways, or religious. Like, it's impossible to say I studied the history of some region and I just took a high-level idea away from. What high-level idea? What does that even mean? You're not studying history at that point. I don't even know if that would count as philosophy. I don't understand what this means. Like when I study the history of a region, I don't remember any of the names, dates, places, or events. I just take away high-level ideas. What, like war is bad? That people can be greedy sometimes?
Thank you for listening to this conversation with the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky. And now, let me answer some questions and try to reflect on and articulate some things I've been thinking about. If you'd like to submit questions, including in audio and video form, go to lexfreeman.com/AMA, or to contact me for whatever other reason, go to lexfreeman.com/contact.
Are the Ukrainians, even in the Eastern Russian-speaking areas, have generally turned away from Russia since they invaded in 2014? Yeah, it's not like a ton of them wanted to leave or anything. I'm just saying that of anybody that was even going to be remotely warmer to Russia, it's going to be people in the East.
First, I got a bunch of questions about this, so let me chat about the topic of language, and let's say the mechanics of multilingual conversation. Perhaps the details are interesting to some people. It also allows me to reflect back on the puzzle of it in this episode, and what I can do better next time. I already explained in the intro the symbolic, historic, and geopolitical complexity of the choice of language in the conversation with President Zelensky. As I said, the Russian language is one that the President speaks fluently, and was his primary language for most of his life. I speak Russian fluently as well. It's the only common language we are both fluent in, so any other combination of languages required an interpreter, including when I spoke English. He did need an interpreter when I spoke English, and, just like I was visibly encumbered and annoyed by the process of interpretation. This is why I try to speak in Russian to the President instead of English, so that he can directly understand me without an interpreter. I'm willing to take the hit for that, as I am for everything else. I'm not trying to protect myself. I'm trying to do whatever is best for the conversation, for understanding. Though it has been getting harder and harder to stay open, vulnerable, and raw in public, while the swarms of chanting internet mobs stop by with their torches and their color-coded hats, flags, frogs, pronouns, and hashtags. Anyway, there is a lot of nuanced aspects of the conversational language that I would like to explain here. I'll try to be brief. I can recommend a lot of books on this topic of language and communication that reveal just how amazing this technology of language is. For example, for a good overview, I recommend John McWhorter's books, and especially his lecture series for the great courses on language. There are several. In the Story of Human Language series, he gives a great discussion on spoken language versus written language, and that spoken language often relaxes the rules of communication. It uses shorter packets of words, loads in a bunch of subtle cues and meanings, all of which, like I'm trying to describe, are lost when there's an interpreter in the loop. Let me also describe some relevant characteristics of my peculiar language abilities, in quotes.
While this is true, it's better to have an interpreter if you're not very fluent or comfortable in the language, but...
I was never good at speaking. I listen, think, and understand better than I speak. For me, this is true for both English and Russian, but it is especially true for Russian. The Russian language allows for much more room for wit, non-standard turns of phrase, metaphors, humor, rhyme, musicality, and, let's say, the forming of words that create a lot of room for creativity and how meaning and emotion are conveyed. You can do so much English good at speaking. Acts of my peculiar language abilities, in quotes. I was never good at speaking. I listen, think, and understand better than I speak. For me, this is true for both English and Russian, but it is especially true for Russian. The Russian language allows for much more room for wit, non-standard turns of phrase, metaphors, humor, rhyme, musicality, and, let's say...
How? What? I just don't even believe this. I don't think it's even true, but okay.
The forming of words that create a lot of room for creativity and how meaning and emotion are conveyed. You can do the same in English, but it's harder. I actually find that Brits are sometimes very good at this. Like, one of my favorite humans to talk to is Douglas Murray. Setting the content of the conversation aside, the sheer linguistic brilliance and wit of dialogue with Douglas is a journey in itself. I think Christopher Hitchens had the same, and many others. Like I said, especially Brits. Anyway, I'm able to detect and understand a lot of dynamism and humor in the Russian language, but I'm slow to generate it, in part because I just don't practice. I have very few Russian-speaking friends. Funny enough, most of them are Ukrainian, but they speak with me and each other in Russian. But of course, as I mentioned, this is slowly changing due to the war. But I tried to speak to the President in Russian, so he would avoid needing an interpreter as much as possible. One of the things I want to improve for next time is to make sure I get very good equipment for interpretation and arrange for an interpreter I trust to be exceptionally good for the dynamism and the endurance of a 3-hour conversation in the style that I tried to do. Just to give you some behind-the-scenes details of the experience. So equipment-wise, funny enough, it's not actually so trivial to set up wireless connections from.
I could believe that English is not very friendly to variety and phrasing. I wish I knew enough Russian to tell you if I could agree or not, but I feel like from the little bit I know of Spanish and the basically nothing I know of Korean, I don't feel like I've ever felt like the English language lacks a variety in the way to phrase things. I feel like English has like an almost unlimited way to phrase things. And I thought I've heard it said casually. I don't know 100% with certainty, but I thought I've heard it said casually so many different times that English has so many words and so many synonyms and so much connotation and so many different ways to express a thing. But
from us, that you keep talking to the interpreter and then back to us in a way that's super robust and has clean audio.
English is more about vocabulary rather than phrasing. What do you mean by phrase? Isn't there a sentence? Am I crazy? I feel like there's a sentence. It's like a joke, but it illustrates the point. Isn't there a sentence with the word fuck in it like 5 times, and depending on which fuck you emphasize, it means something completely and totally different? What am I thinking of? Does anybody know what I'm talking about? There's a comedy skit? Is it this?
The hardest word in America has been the word I thought it's easy, that I know what means. But it turns out I didn't know shit. I think it's the most complicated word. Like, how can it be if something is bad, it's shit. If something is really good, it's the shit. I would have never guessed that. I had to study that. So important, the article. Like if I give you, that means that that I'm telling you off. But if I give shit, then I care.
I mean, you can do it with a simple sentence too. How are you today? Oh, versus how are you today? Versus how are you today? Versus how are you today? Sure, yeah. I don't know. I'm not buying that. But I don't speak Russian, so I still don't believe it though. I'm gonna take a negative position on that until proven otherwise.
The audio I had in my ear from the interpreter had a loud background noise. So the whole time I'm hearing a shh sound with the voice of the interpreter coming in very quietly. What a wonderful experience this whole life is, frankly. Plus, his translation was often incomplete, at least for me, so I had to put together those puzzle pieces continuously. But again, it worked out, and hopefully our constant switching of languages and having a meta discussion about language provided good insights as to the complexity of this fight for a nation's identity and sovereignty that Ukraine is going through. Behind the scenes, off mic, on a personal level, President Zelensky was funny, thoughtful, and just a kind-hearted person. And really, the whole team were just great people.
There you go. Thank you. Sorry, I think this is what I was thinking. This is it's a sentence where the sentence changes almost completely depending on which word is emphasized. I never said she stole my money. I never said she stole my money, with the implication meaning that someone else said it, but I didn't. I never said she stole my money. I simply did never say it. I never said she stole my money. I might have implied it in some way, but I never explicitly said it. I never said she stole my money. I just said someone took it. I didn't say it was she. I never said she stole my money. I just said she probably borrowed it. I never said she stole my money. I said she stole someone else's money, and I never said she stole my money. I said she stole something of mine, but not my money. Yeah. Thank you guys. Don't hate on my language.
It was an experience I'll never forget. After the conversation was recorded, the next challenge was to translate all of this and overdub it, and do it super quickly. Like, these words I'm speaking now have to be translated and dubbed into Ukrainian and Russian. 11 Labs were really helpful here, especially bringing the president's voice to life in different languages. But even more than that, they're just an amazing team who inspired me and everyone involved. Please go support 11 Labs. They are a great company and great people. The translation is separate from the text-to-speech and was done in part by AI and a lot by human. This is where the fact that we had constant switching between 3 languages was a real challenge. So there are 6 transition mappings that have to be done. English to Ukrainian and Russian, Ukrainian to English and Russian, and then Russian to English and Ukrainian. Continuously, sentence by sentence, sometimes word by word. And each combination of language to language translation is best done by a person who specializes in that kind of mapping. So it was all a beautiful mess, all of it. And on top of all that, great translation is super hard. For example, I've read and listened to a lot of Dostoevsky in both English and Russian, and studied the process of how these books are translated by various translators. You can spend a week discussing how to translate a single important sentence well. Obviously, in this situation, we don't have weeks, we have hours for the whole thing. One of the things I regret is not putting enough time into the hiring and selecting great translators, from Russian and Ukrainian to English, especially. I think translation is an art, and so getting a good translator that works well with us is a process that needs more time and effort. I'll be doing that more this month. By the way, we have a small but amazing team. If you want to join us, go to letsfreeman.com/hiring. If you're passionate, work hard, and everyone on the team loves working with you, then we'll do some epic stuff together. We'd love to work with you. Like I said about 11 Labs, there are a few things as awesome in life as being able to work hard with an amazing team towards a mission all of us are passionate about. Anyway, I'll probably be doing a few more interviews in the Russian language. I do have a lingering goal of interviewing the mathematician Grigory Perelman, but there's also others. I will also work on improving my whole pipeline, both equipment-wise and interpreter-wise, in doing these conversations in other languages. Because there are many that I would like to do in languages I don't speak at all, like Chinese, Mandarin, or Spanish, Arabic, Hindi, Portuguese, French, German. I see language as both a barrier for communication and a portal into understanding the spirit of people connected by that language. It's all a weird and beautiful puzzle, and I'm just excited to get the chance to explore it. All right, I got a question on how I prepare for podcasts. So this has evolved and expanded more and more over time. There are some podcasts that I prepare hundreds of hours for. In AI terms, let's say, first I'm training a solid background model by consuming as much variety on the topic as possible. A lot of this comes down to picking high signal sources, whether it's blogs, books, podcasts, YouTube videos, X accounts, and so on. For this conversation with President Zelensky, for example, since February 2022, I've spoken with hundreds of people on the ground. I've read Kindle or audiobook about 10 books fully, and then I skimmed about 20 more. And I don't mean books about Zelensky, although he does appear in some of them. I mean books where...
But, like, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, it sounds to me, but I just don't believe it. What was a single question or a single thing that was brought up in this conversation that made it seem like we were illustrative, I think that's the word, right, of some kind of, like, deep knowledge of something more than just the most surface level knowledge ever of this conflict or of the country or of the history? Like, I don't know what it means when people say read a book. I don't know what that means anymore. I have no idea. I don't know what that even means.
this conversation was fully in the back of my mind as I'm reading the book. So, for example, I read Red Famine by Anna Applebaum. It's about Holodomor. Does it directly relate to Zelensky? Not on the surface, no, but it sort of continues to weave the fabric of my understanding of people.
Like,
does it relate to Zelensky? Not on the surface, no, but it sort of...
I guess most of the population. I don't know where, I don't know which parts of Ukraine were Russified at which points, but like, we, hold on. I'm so sorry.
I don't mean books about Zelensky.
Okay. My Soviet history is not the best version of the concept for Russia, okay, and it's called Russification, all right? You know how in the West, white people talk about how the United States does like cultural imperialism and all that shit, okay? Imagine that, but like for real, and not just with like white women with blue hair talking about it. So this can take the form of overthrowing governments and installing your own dictators, and then changing things like the language, changing things like the history. It could involve like actually killing large amounts of people and shipping in your own citizens and giving them passports. It could involve taking away like Moldova and Transnistria, right, which is like an independent territory in Moldova now. I think has like a lot of Russian citizen passports. It could take the form of starving people in certain territories, like during the Holodomor, which I think impacted. I think it was Kazakhstan and Ukraine the most. I think it was those two, right? Russification is like a huge part of Russian history and the history of the countries around it that I'm pretty sure goes. I think it precedes even the country of Russia and precedes even the Soviet Empire. Like I think I'm pretty sure Ukraine has been fighting, and the territories around Russia have been fighting since prior. For like centuries, like over 400 or 500 years. Like I think there's been like tons of conflict. But my history before even of the Soviet Union is poor at best. Okay, I'm torching the bridge or any concept of a bridge ever. But like,
although he does appear in some of them. I mean, books where this conversation was full. It's about as I'm reading the book. So, for example, I read Red Famine by Anna Applebaum. It's about Holodomor. Does it directly relate to Zelensky? Not on the surface, no, but it sort of continues to weave the fabric of my understanding of a people, of the history of the region. But it's really important for me to read books from various perspectives.
I don't understand how you could ever look at an event like the Holodomor and not even be able to draw at least a couple of relevant comparisons today to the idea that when people talk about ethnic Russians existing in Ukraine, or when people talk about a lot of people speaking Russian there, a lot of this, I'm pretty sure population replacement happened after the mass death and starvation of the Holodomor. I think, especially in Crimea, I think that's where a lot of the Russian population comes from. My history is so horrible here. It's been a long time now. But like, to say that like you've like I don't know if it's even to say that like you've read like this book on the Holodomor and you can't even like, well, does this really relate to anything today? No, not at all. Like, is it? I always want to say Tatar, but I think that's the raw meat you eat. The tartar. I don't know how to do it. I don't understand how you can't relate a single one of any of these things, of any of these historical facts to anything going on today, but then say that you've like read all these books on the conflict. That's just like that's an outstanding stain to me. That's an outstanding statement to me. Is it Tatar or is it Tatar? I don't know how you could ever make these statements together. Like, I'm trying to think of an equivalent statement. I'm trying to think of an equivalent statement for the United States. It's just like an unbelievable statement to make. This is just like an unbelievable statement to make. Tatar.
And I'm always trying to calculate the bias under which the author operates and adjusting for that in my brain as I integrate the information. For example, Anna Applebaum's book, Gulag, is very different from Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. The former is a rigorous, comprehensive historical account. The latter is a literary, psychological, and personal portrait of Soviet society. Both, I think, are extremely valuable. On the bias front,
I'm sorry, the bridge is totally burned.
It's very different from, for example, Anna Applebaum's book, Gulag, is very for that in my brain as I integrate the information. For example, Anna Applebaum's book, Gulag, adjusting for that in practice. And I'm always trying to calculate, but it's really important for me to read books from various perspectives. And I'm always trying to calculate the bias under which the author operates and adjusting for that in my brain.
Okay, these are statements. I need a name for these statements. I wish I had a name for these statements. There are things that sound good when you say them, but they're empty without any examples, right? You just say a thing and it's like I adjust for bias. Okay, that's a good statement, I guess, but what does that mean, right? Like you adjust for bias. Like, okay, that sounds fine. And then can we get an example? But he gives examples.
As I integrate the information. For example, Anna Applebaum's book, Gulag, is very different from...
Okay, so when he gives this book here, Gulag, a history, okay? So my guess is he's going to give a book written of a similar style, covering the same event, and then the comparison is going to be how, especially when it comes to history, okay? I'm giving you a very, 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 very surface level retard take here, but it's still better than every other retard on the internet, okay? Because nobody's read literally fucking anything, apparently, okay? Usually in history, when it comes to a disagreement on things, it's not like there's, oh, I'm biased, so I think there were 4 nukes in Japan, or oh, I'm biased, so I think there... Generally, it's going to be like an overemphasizing or a de-emphasizing of certain contributing factors to other things. Maybe it'll be like weighing some evidence that might be contentious or not over whether or not we think it's like a real thing or not, but very rarely is it going to be a totally separate retelling of facts. That's just generally, in the academic discipline of history, it's generally is not the case. That it's just a totally separate retelling of facts. It's generally not the case. Like if you were to talk about like the Irish potato famine and whether or not that was like engineered or whether or not it was an intentional genocide or whatever, and you're gonna like the claim is not going to be were they actually selling potatoes when they were starving, right? Well, one side says they were, one side says they weren't. That's the debate. No, the question is like in the process of selling these things, like why was it happening? What were the different contributory factors? What were the market conditions? Why was stuff being shipped out? Like these are the arguments, and you get into a lot of nuanced and complicated weighing of what's going on here, right? So when we bring up this book, then the expectation is going to bring up another book of a similar style, meaning another like dispassionate, what would you call this, like tertiary source, where you're sourcing other primary and secondary sources to create like a compilation thing or whatever. I don't know if you would consider this secondary or tertiary writing, but you're going to compare to something of that nature, right?
Alexander Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago. The former is a rigorous comprehensive historical account. The latter is a literary, psychological, and personal portrait of Soviet society.
These are not two different books that you weigh against each other. It doesn't sound like that.
Account. The latter is a literary, psychological, and personal portrait of Soviet society.
These don't sound like they're written about the same subject matter at all, almost. They might happen in the same area, and they might be a part of the same events, but it's not, it would be like saying, like, I'm trying to weigh the biases, so I read, you know, like Smith's compilation of, or Smith's telling of the Civil War in the United States, and I'm trying to weigh the biases in that against, you know, like, Theodore's journey through Alabama, fighting in the Civil War, whatever. Like, these are sorry, these are just not great examples.
Both, I think, are extremely valuable. On the bias front, for example, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich by William Shirer is a good example. It is still biased, but he was there, and to me, he has written probably one of the greatest, if not the greatest book on the Third Reich ever. But like I said, there's a lot of inaccuracies and biases. You can read about them online if you like. The greatest book on the Third Reich ever.
The greatest book in what way? Like, in that it's the most factual, like, I don't know what that means. Does he mean to say that it's, because, well, it must not be the most factually accurate, because he's saying it has a lot of factual inaccuracies. Is it the most entertaining? Is it the one that summarizes their core beliefs the best? Is it the one that makes them look the best? Is it the one that captures some feeling, or captures some state of human affairs, or captures the, like, what do we mean by one of the best ever?
There, and to me, he has written probably one of the greatest.
I have no idea what that means. I don't know.
Not the greatest book on the Third Reich ever. But like I said, it has a lot of inaccuracies and biases. You can read about them online if you like. But my job in this case, and in all cases, is to adjust based on my understanding of the author's biases and take the wisdom from the text where it can be found, and putting the inaccuracies aside into the proverbial dustbins of history. So as I'm writing down my thoughts as they come up. Always digging.
Post them. Which thoughts? Write them down. Or I'm sorry, post them. I'm so curious.
For some deeper insight about human nature. If I'm at my computer, I'll write it down in Google Doc. Sometimes use Notion or Obsidian. If I'm not on my computer, I'll use Google Keep. So for example, if I'm listening to an audiobook and I'm running along the river, if a good idea comes to mind, I'll stop, think for a few seconds, and then do speech to text note in Google Keep. By the way, listening to audiobook at 1x speed. Old school. And eventually I get a gigantic pile of thoughts and notes that I look over to refresh my memory. But for the most part, I just throw them out. It's a background model building process. By the way, LLMs are increasingly becoming useful here for organizational purposes, but have not yet been useful, at least for me, and I do try a lot for...
What is Vera even supposed to take away from all this, other than he name drops some book? I don't know. It's not even like a good... It's just whatever.
Insight extraction or insight generation purposes. I should mention that my memory for specific facts, names, dates, quotes is terrible. What I remember well is high-level ideas. That's just how my brain works, for better or for worse.
I don't want to sound mean, and I know this is torched. I've torched this. Like, I just don't believe that's the case. I don't believe that my brain is so special and so exceptional and the only person on the planet that can do this. I think that the reason why you don't remember names or dates or places is just because you don't actually read anything or study anything about it, because you have to. You have to know these things, right? And if anything, it just in my very, very little exploration of history, I feel like the names and the places are the things that sometimes stand out the most. Like, these are some of the most important and awe-inspiring things. Like I'm sure for, I don't know fuck all about World War II, but even I know some of the places and shit. The fucking bombing of Dresden and all the civilians that ended up dying there, or storming the beaches of Normandy, or the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and the fucking fire bombings of Tokyo, and like all these like you know the places, and you'll know some of the dates, and you know the names of the people that involved. This doesn't make any sense. This has to be noticeable. Other people have to notice this, and this stuff will stick in your brain because like you've read it, and it makes sense because history happened. It's a real thing. There's a chronology to it. There are people and there are countries, and the way that they interact with each other makes sense because it literally happened. It actually happened, so they have to put in. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm done ranting about this. I'm only being this much of a stickler because he's expertised himself in this area. He said he read countless books. Now he said he's read 10 books, 10 full books on this. And you don't have a mind for any names, for any dates, for any countries. 10 full books. Maybe you should read 2 or 1. Just don't read 10 books. If you're not absorbing anything, if you're not absorbing a single thing from any of this, then why read any more at all? Maybe read a Wikipedia article, listen to a podcast at 0.75x speed, like
organizational purposes, but have not yet been useful, at least for me, and I do try a lot for insight extract, and eventually I get a gigantic pile of thoughts and notes that I look over to refresh my memory. But for the most part, I just throw them out. It's a background model building process. By the way, LLMs are increased along the river. If a good idea comes to mind, I'll stop, think for a few seconds.
I'm sorry, fuck, I'm so triggered. Listen, if you would have come from 5 years ago, I said history sucks.
They come up. Always digging for some deeper insight about human nature. If I'm at my computer and putting the inaccuracies aside based on my understanding of the proverbial dustbins of history. So as I'm writing down my thoughts as they come up. Always digging for some deeper insight about human nature. If I'm at my computer, I'll write it down in Google Doc. Sometimes use Notion or Obsidian. If I'm not on my computer, I'll use Google Keep. So for example, if I'm listening to an audiobook and I'm running along the river, if a good idea comes to mind, I'll stop, think for a few seconds, and then do speech to text note in Google Keep. By the way, listening to audiobook at 1x speed. Old school. And eventually I get a gigantic pile of thoughts.
So old school is actually just reading a book, but okay.
And notes that I look over to refresh my memory. But for the most part, I just throw them out. It's a background model building.
Oh, he throws out his notes? Why? Wait, he takes. Why would you take an audio note and then throw the note out? He doesn't take any notes. He hasn't read any of these books. All of this was a meme. That was a joke, Destiny? Was it?
Process. By the way, LLM...
Or was the old school thing a joke? I couldn't tell because an audiobook might be old school compared to today if he's referencing like Wikipedia articles and podcasts. I don't know. I can't tell.
LLMs are increasingly, for the most part, I just throw them out. It's a background model building process. By the way, LLMs are increasingly becoming useful here for organizational purposes, but have not yet been useful, at least for me, and I do try a lot for insight extraction or insight generation purposes. I should mention that my memory for specific facts, names, dates, quotes is terrible. What I remember well is high-level ideas. That's just how my brain works, for better or for worse.
Okay, if this is the case, don't waste your time studying history and don't pretend to study history because you're not learning history at that point. History is a collection of names and dates and places and then a chronology and a story that relates these in some way. It could relate them through wars or diplomacy or marriages or domestic conflict or economics or trade. There's a million ways, or religious. Like, it's impossible to say I studied the history of some region and I just took a high-level idea away from. What high-level idea? What does that even mean? You're not studying history at that point. I don't even know if that would count as philosophy. That's a 5-minute YouTube video. I don't understand what this means. Like when I study the history of a region, I don't remember any of the names, dates, places, or events. I just take away high-level ideas. What, like war is bad? That people can be greedy sometimes? That bad shit happens? Like what does that mean?
These quotes is terrible. What I remember well is high-level ideas. That's just how my brain works, for better or for worse. I realize that sometimes forgetting all of the details and the words needed to express them makes me sound simplistic and even unprepared. I'm not. But that's life. We have to accept our flaws and roll with them. Aside from books, I also listen to a lot of podcasts and YouTube videos where people are talking about the topic. So for the President Zelensky episode, I listen probably to hundreds of hours of content from his supporters and from his critics from all sides. Again, I choose...
What question was like the high-level question that came just because of his...
The number of soldiers,
yes,
and the number of artillery rounds is not everything. As you said, let's say Donald Trump guarantees security for 4 years. You can form partnerships with India, with Saudi Arabia, that enforce punishment, the stick, on oil prices, for example, if any aggressive action is taken. You can actually even build Ahmed Alot.
Okay, we've got sanctions. What do we put sanctions instead of having a security guarantee?
I have a dream that, let's say, on January 25, or sometime at the end of January this year, you will sit down with Donald Trump, with Vladimir Putin, and together negotiate a ceasefire with strict security guarantees.
Fuck! Sorry, I'm so triggered by this, okay? Here are some interesting questions that I think would have been interesting. I don't know that much about the history of this area, okay? What is your explanation or your take? And I'm sure you have to something ahead of time. Why did Minsk 1 and why did Minsk 2 fall apart, right? Why did the Minsk agreements fall apart between 1 and 2? Because some blame is given to each side obviously by Ukrainians and by Russians and by other observers for what happened here, right? You had ceasefires that were agreed upon. I believe especially the Minsk 2 one happened very closely to the seizure of I wish I could remember what the airport was or whatever, right? But like, why do you think some of these peace agreements fell apart? That would be like a specific question that would demonstrate that like, oh, you're familiar with specifics of the conflict and you're familiar with the specific thing in the conflict, and you can ask a specific question about the conflict. That would be like, oh, he's read something or studied this, okay? And these are like very, like, I don't know much about these, right? For Azov and the battalions, like what were the military differences between the invasion into Crimea in 2014 versus the integrating all the battalions into your military proper afterwards? How did Ukraine's economy develop? How did your military develop into a wartime military and economy? There's been a lot of like challenges and difficulties there. It's not like you just randomly had a whole ass fucking army ready to fucking go, right? Disbanding all of the battalions and then like rolling them into the military proper in the process for that, like those could be interesting questions. When you talk about banning the Russian language, that stupid fucking talking point, how do you decide what is propaganda in your country? How do you decide which radio stations are from Russian oligarchs versus what is a general or a genuine opinion from a citizen in your country? Like, how do you even tease these two things apart? What do you think about the referendum held in Crimea? The fact that some people say that Putin himself says that the referendum in Crimea was an important referendum that showed that the Ukrainian people really did want to secede from Ukraine, or in the Donbass, the little green men, the people that were there when they were doing the separatist voting in Donetsk and Luhansk. There are a million other questions like this, okay, that could be asked with my like very limited knowledge, okay, of this conflict. I have read 0 books on Ukraine, to be honest, none. I don't understand what question there was asked here, or what part of the conversation was like, oh shit, he's like really expertise in this region, and I can tell because of this question, because of the knowledge that he's showing here, because of the engagement he has with Zelensky. I'm sorry, this whole thing drives me insane. I hate this like aesthetic of intelligence, this aesthetic of like I'm learned and educated, and I'm coming at this from a very critical, knowledgeable point of view, and it's like these are just like Twitter talking points. This was like this is like a bot trained on Twitter comments, like given interview form. That's it. I'm done. Okay.
For Paul Rosalie, round 2. Especially, I literally went deep into the jungle with Paul, and like preparing for recruitment process. Or they say that it's X hours per episode is not accurate because a lot of this preparation transfers from one guest to another, even when there's an insane level of variety in the guests. We're all humans, after all. There is a thread that connects all of it together, somehow, if you look closely enough. For more technical guests in STEM fields, I'll read papers. A lot of papers. And also technical blog posts and technical tweet threads. This is a very different process. For AI or CS related topics, I will run other people's code, I'll write my own, implement stuff from scratch. If it's a software company, I'll use their tools and software if relevant. But in the actual conversation, I constantly am searching for simple but profound insights at various levels of abstraction. Sometimes this means asking a trivial question.
Levels of abstraction can only appreciably happen when you understand the underlying material. Anything else is guesswork. I don't give a fuck what an uneducated person's abstraction is of a material that they can't abstract from. What do you think abstraction means? What you're talking about is not an abstraction. What you're talking about is a base level engagement with the subject matter because you can't fully grasp it. Like, imagine me trying to redesign fucking Agile or some bullshit because of my abstraction. Like, yeah, I don't really know any programming. I don't know any formal management systems. I don't actually know how any of these larger projects work. But like, I know a lot of jokes about GitHub and Scrum Master, so I feel like I could probably, you know, like, you would immediately be like, why would I even give a fuck what your abstraction is when you can't even explain the underlying material, let alone critically engage with it? Like,
in hopes of uncovering the non-trivial, counterintuitive but fundamental idea that opens the door to a whole new way of looking at the field. And actually, every guest is their own puzzle. Like preparing for recruitment was me listening to hundreds of songs he produced and even learning some on guitar, like Hurt by Johnny Cash. Preparing for the Cursor team episode meant obviously I had to use Cursor fully for several weeks, all of its features, so I switched completely from VS Code to Cursor. For Paul Rosalie, round 2 especially, I literally went deep into the jungle with Paul and almost died, fully taking a leap toward adventure with him. When he gets close to the conversation, I'll start working on the actual interview questions and notes. And there I'm asking myself, what am I personally curious about? Like, I love podcasts. I'm a big fan of many, many podcasts. So I asked myself, what would I want this person to explain on the podcast? And maybe what aspect of their thought process or their humanity would I want to be surfaced or have the chance to be surfaced? In the actual conversation, I always try to put my ego aside completely and do whatever it takes to have a good conversation and serve the listener. This means asking questions simply, trying to define terms and give context if needed, being open-minded, vulnerable, curious, and challenging the guest when needed. Despite the claims on the internet, I do ask a lot of challenging questions, including follow-ups, but always with empathy. I don't need to be right. I don't need to signal my moral or intellectual superiority to anyone. I try to do the opposite, actually, because I want the guest to open up, and I trust the intelligence of the listener to see for themselves if the guest is full of shit or not, to detect the flaws and the strengths of how the guest thinks or who they are deep down. A lot of times, when interviewers grill the guest, it doesn't reveal much, except give a dopamine hit to the echo chambers who hate the guest. As I said in the intro, I believe the line between good and evil does run to the heart of every man. The resulting conversations are sometimes a failure. Sometimes because they're too short, sometimes because the chemistry was just not working, sometimes because I fucked it up. I try to take risks, give it everything I got, and enjoy the roller coaster of it all, no matter what. And as I said, I trust the listener to put it all together, and I trust the critic to tear it apart, and I love you all for it. All right, I got a bit of a fun question. It's a long one. So Delian, cool name, wrote in saying he spotted me out in the wild and had a question about it. He wrote, I saw Lex working at the Detroit airport between flights. I hesitated and ultimately decided not to interrupt since he was in focus mode. True. Lex had his headphones earbuds on, listening to brown noise. Microsoft Surface propped up at eye level, Kinesis Advantage keyboard on the table. The use of Microsoft Windows is surprising, but it has been discussed in the past. True. The ergonomics of the setup, Surface at eye level, means that Lex cares about his health. But the anomalously large Kinesis Advantage keyboard seems like such a burden to lug around airports. I cannot help but ask, why is it that Lex is going through the hassle to bring this absolutely large keyboard with him as carry-on? It barely fits in a backpack. Carrying it around must be necessary for Lex for some reason. I love the puzzle of this, that you're trying to think through this. The pain of lugging this tool around must be much smaller than the problem it solves for it. Question mark. What problem does this keyboard solve? What makes it necessary at the airport? Productivity, health, RSI? Good questions. Thank you, Delia. Great question. It made me smile, so I thought I'd answer. I remember that day. There was something else about that day aside from the keyboard that I miss. So I am filled with a melancholy feeling that is appropriate for the holiday season. So let me try to set the melancholy feeling aside and answer a question about my computer setup when I'm traveling. So whether I'm going to SF, Boston, Austin, London, or the front in Ukraine, I am always bringing the Kinesis keyboard. I don't have RSI or any other health issues of that kind that I'm aware of, even though I've been programming, playing guitar, doing all kinds of combat sports my whole life, all of which put my hands in.
Oh, real quick. So again, I want to chat. Go support my tweet, okay, so that I can grill Zelensky and destroy Ukraine, okay? I think this is his comms, I think it's internet comms guy? Or his comms advisor. There you go. Like and retweet. I love you. Hi, what's up?
Hello?
Hey, what's up? How's it going?
I have to contain myself. I have so much to say and I don't want to be for 3 hours. But just I did listen to his explanation about the language thing. Mm-hmm. So I just watched Zelensky's bit with him like in original without the dub, with the AI dub for my week panel because Week invited me to talk about this. Mm-hmm. So
just for clarity, do you speak fluent Russian and Ukrainian?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. All right.
And sort of English, as you noticed. So it's one thing though. I watched it with you just now together, and it's such bullshit. It's such bullshit. Let me start. I'm a translator, like as a profession right now. So I work. What I do is exactly what he says is barely possible to do. Apparently, I juggle usually Ukrainian, Russian, and English. So those are the three most common languages that Ukrainian will know, especially a translator. And right now, there is zero shortage of professional translators and interpretation people in Ukraine. As you can probably know why, because there's a bunch of journalists that are doing interviews with people who are foreigners. I did them with like smaller streamers, like, Dylan, Devin. I did them for The Economist, for example, people, people like of the big legacy journals, all sorts of people, right? Yeah. And usually what I do is I'm there, right? And I am interpreting live, back and forth. So the questions to the person, and then what they say in the short form. And then afterwards, I do the full transcript, subtitles, right? Of the Russian or Ukrainian bits. And then I finish it, and then I present it to the person who, asked for it as a job, right? And then they make either just subtitles or they make dub over those human-made subtitles, right? By me or someone else, right?
Yeah.
And he is talking with the president.
Yeah, it's not like this is it's not like this is a live conversation that's like, on the front lines where like time is of the essence. Like this is a prepared interview where you've got all the time in the world and you've got like it's just a little silly, yeah.
And we can do it on the literal front line. Yeah. I did that shit in fucking Chasiv Yar, okay? Like at the front line. We can do it there, then he can fucking do it in Kiev. With United 24, for example, is a media that, is Zelensky's essentially media thing, right? Media platform. Do you think there are no people there who can do a translation? A proper one? Are we for real right now?
The only difference could be if, and I heard this wasn't the case, but I can't judge it. That's what I'm going to say. The only exception I could see is if it was the case that Lex was like incredibly fluent in Russian and then could express like the full gamut of. Okay, then that would be the only way I could see it as being kind of acceptable.
I actually tried to be as charitable as humanly possible, not to let my personal dislike, influence me. So when that whole controversy happened, when he made this public tweet essentially pressuring, unironically, Zelensky to do the Russian interview in Russian. And so many people were like, oh, Ukrainians got hell ass paint, as you probably imagine. Like, a lot of people got like, oh, those fucking Ukrainians, they just, they're so triggered. Why can't they do it in Russian? All of that, right? So there was a lot of conversation about that. And I was like, well, if we like look at this in a vacuum, like remove all context, the history, how important it is to preserve Ukrainian language, all of that, remove all of that, right? And just in vacuum, two people like know the language, right? And they can speak, the flow of the conversation will be sort of like, as like said, the best as it can be in a language that both people speak fluently, right?
Sure, yeah.
So I gave him the benefit of the doubt that was his intent. But, of course, you cannot remove the fucking context, especially right now, when Ukrainian language is prohibited again in occupation. People are thrown in basements right now for speaking Ukrainian, okay? This is not the time. We cannot afford, he's a president. If I was speaking to Lex, for example, I could speak with him in English. First of all, fuck you. And second of all, if I could afford to speak with him in Russian, I could, right? I'm just a regular person. Zelensky is a face of a nation that is fighting right now to be Ukraine, okay? He can, his approval rating will drop like 30% if he spoke in Russian in this interview. It's just absolutely like, and he knows it. He knows it. He knows it. Let's not pretend that he doesn't know it. He's acknowledging it himself in the fucking video itself, that there is that language is important, that it's a sensitive topic in Ukraine, to put it mildly. He knows it. So why the hell didn't he say that in DMs, for example, with the Zelensky team? No, he made a public Twitter. He made it for everyone to see and discuss for a week after Zelensky agreed to an interview, right? Yeah. So, yeah, and it's just, there is like this, and his language ended up, he speaks Russian about as well as Zelensky speaks English, okay? So I wouldn't say it's awful, but it's definitely not what I would say fluent. So what the fuck, man? Like, it would have been the same difference if he spoke English all the time. Like, it was a fucking power move, okay? I will not back down from this. It was a power move. He tried to pressure him to essentially, and all the excuses as well. Like, he was like, oh, the Russians will hear you. They already heard us. Yeah. Zelensky addressed them in Russian like bajillion times for entire year of the war. He addressed people. He made addresses in Russian towards Russians. All of us did. We have Telegram channels that we talk all of us in Russian. They still are in our fucking chats, okay? Russians. So it's just the east of Ukraine speaks Russian. We all know it. So it's absurd. They heard all of it. Nothing new will be achieved with this fucking interview, okay? American audience, sure, right? Yeah, that might be important, right, for the American audience to hear it, but they will not listen to it in Russian.
Yeah, I was wholly unconvinced, and it's also bad too because like I can't speak as much to the Eastern thing, but in the West, like for us, like language is just language. But like if you know anything about Ukraine and Russia and the weird like cultural signaling that Putin has done around like Ukraine and Russia and like the long lost deep brothers and everything, like yeah, it just seems such a touchy subject. Yeah, exactly. I'm reiterating what you said. Yeah, the idea like okay, let's have the Ukrainian leader now speak in Russian because we are all brothers and we all do have peace and love. Like, yeah, it's just such a weirdly cringe. Yeah. Ugh. Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah, by the way, you asked, you not asked, you like contemplated essentially, like when the language thing started to be a problem. It started to be a problem in 1863, okay? In 1863 was the first law of the prohibition of Ukrainian language by Russian Empire. So it's a long thing, okay? It's a centuries-long thing. And the preservation of Ukrainian language and Ukrainian identity has been basically the crux, the whole point, the essence, okay, of this entire struggle. Of them executing our writers, of our poets, of them prosecuting the language, of them prohibiting language to be books to be published, schools to be teaching it, of them trying to basically every trick in the book to try to eliminate the language, okay? And they succeeded in some parts of the the country, and there has been a revival of the Ukrainian language, which is great, obviously, right? Because in Belarus, for example, they killed the language, Belarusian, I mean. Yeah, so it's just it's so fucking, it's not even tone deaf, because it would be tone deaf if he wasn't a fucking Russian himself.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, no, yeah, that's true. Yeah. And if he hadn't read 10 books on it and skimmed numerous others and listened to hundreds of hours of, yeah.
Oh, fuck me, dude. It's just so, I will not, if that was like some sort of like a Joe Rogan person, I don't know, like, that for some reason I don't know, doesn't make sense. That I talked with actually like one British dude who is a journalist, and he knows Russian relatively well, but he's not Russian. He just learned it for the work he was doing. So I could, that would be one thing, but this person is also Russian. Like he presents himself as Ukrainian, and I suppose his like grandparents were in Kiev, but he was born in Tajikistan, and then he spent all of his time in Moscow, and then he moved to the United States. Okay, it's just.
It's also weird too. Like it's also weird too, and I don't know his history as much, but I imagine it's a bit different to say that like, oh, like my family's background and everybody was like born in Ukraine and all this when they were also born into the Soviet Union. Like I feel like the relationship is going to be a bit different there as well, right? If you're born into the Soviet Union and then he grew up in, did you say Moscow and Petersburg or Moscow and somewhere else? Like it's just it feels like a lot of the time there's a lot of the trying to like buy credit and everything. And it's like it feels really stupid.
Yeah, they also use it only when it's fucking convenient. Like for example, that fucking Kisin dude, he was like, oh, I have a family. He's in Russia. He was born in Russia. He was born in Moscow. Okay, he's not Ukrainian. But he then was like, oh, I have family like that is in Ukraine. Fucking settlers in Crimea. Okay, so it's just extremely, and I'm so over people thinking that's like naivety or it's like some sort of like silliness, weak, with all my love to weak, okay, but I didn't even know it when I went to the panel, but he was like, it's stupid, he should do an interview with Russian, in Russian, he said it weak, like apparently I didn't even know it, like, because Lex is such a great guy apparently, and he couldn't have a bad intent.
Yeah, but then also there has to be like some level of responsibility. There can't be naivety as well, right? One thing that I don't like, I've had this conversation in real life a couple times recently, at least in the West, there's this huge divorce between politics and the real world. And it's like politics is kind of just like a game and a joke, and it's just like content, and it's just like fun stuff to talk about. But it's like you're having like a conversation with the actual real life president of a country that is actually in a real life war right now, where people are actually real life dying, like in war. Like it's not just like a YouTube video where you're going for maximum engagement on. So it can't just be like, oh, I'm naive and I didn't know anything. Like this, the fact that you even have this level of access is like insane. And to take it for granted to do content is just very weird. In that, I don't know.
True that, but also like he presents himself as someone who's like an expert, sort of. Like,
yeah, exactly. He expertise himself. Yeah, the ethnic, the familial background, all the books, all the yeah.
And there's a lot of subtle things that it's difficult to pick up for Americans, I suppose, who don't know all the. For example, the thing that he did with the language, that the Russian language is so much better for communication because it's a melodic, emotional. Okay, it's a superior language. You don't know this meme, obviously, because you're American, but this is one of the most central memes in Russia. That English is inferior. It's the language of the sellers, and it's the language of the inferior variety, because everything in Russian is a language of poets, of Pushkin, or whatever the fuck, Kuyushkin, all of that. But English is inferior. It has been something I heard so much growing up. For example, like cultural figures like Zadornov, he's like a comedian and a political person, like social commentator in Russia. He's dead, I believe, right now. He's of old age, but he was like doing entire like performances based around how fucking retarded and stupid English is, and how glorious and like aristocratical and filled with feeling and sound and music Russian language is. So it's also like basically a meme what he did there. So you probably wouldn't know it, but there was like even this meme that Russians said they can't watch movies in original because Russian dub is just so superior.
Nice. Okay.
Like it always made me like my face would like cringe, because it's just so, first of all, like actors obviously are better than fucking dub people. Okay, like in most cases, like actors perform better if you listen to them speak in the actual language they speak in, right? And first of all, second of all, Russian dub was shit. It was always shit. It was incredibly. It was horrible translation. Like absolutely lost the plot of the movie when you listen to Russian translation. But they always said that they don't want to scar their ears, okay, with that dog speak, okay? So that's also a meme. Like it's a complete and utter crap. If you know the language, you can express yourself well in it, no matter what. Like obviously, I can express myself probably a bit better in Russian because of the it's my original language. But yes, if you're like a professional translator, you can make this connection between the languages easy. So yeah, it's pretty fucking horrible and dumb, and I'm sure people still don't understand all of that. But also when he was like asking questions, like you pointed it out, thank fuck, at least you see. I was like borderline removing tears. I'm like, someone understands. That he asked all the memes, all the questions that are propaganda about about the martial law, for example. That's one of the biggest memes, right? That like Zelensky is actually a dictator, and he's throwing those poor Ukrainians to die for his own gain on the front lines. That's like the biggest like thing, right? And he asked that in a polite way, in a gentle way, okay? But
even past the just like it would even be better to ask like, do you want to talk about martial law maybe or something like that, rather than to like assume that it's already been passed in like, because as soon as you say that, especially to Western audiences, like that's like the worst thing in the world, especially to Americans, like martial law, holy shit, all the freedoms are gone, and then to pretend like there's some conflict between martial law as it's laid out constitutionally in a time of war versus freedom, and it's like what? Like yeah, this whole thing is.
The implication
is that he's fighting against freedom.
Yeah, that he's not actually the democratic president, that he's not actually about the democracy and freedom and liberation, because he, as you know, did a martial law. Okay.
Yeah.
That is the most retarded point, because excuse me, like I know like most of Americans didn't actually like know about fighting in World War II, but nobody asked my grandparents, okay, whether they want to go to fight Nazis or not. They weren't asked. Their opinion wasn't asked, and there wasn't even an age limitation. Everyone was fucking thrown at the front, like 18, whatever the fuck, like barely born alive, go to the front, dude, right? Nobody asked. Our actual martial law is 10 times gentler than it usually is in situations like this. So it's so fucking annoying. We haven't even removed the age limit from 25.
And the way that framing goes too is it's always presented as though like basically like, why do you guys keep like doing this? It's so retarded. Like why don't you just like stop fighting like this war? Like it's just like such an obviously stupid thing to be fighting a war, and it's so dumb. And like why don't you just stop? Like you know that people are dying, right? Are you stupid? Like why are you fighting a war? Like you can just show that.
It's just unbearable. It's so fucking stupid. Like it's just the same thing with the elections, right? That's also a big meme.
Oh yeah, like why did you put And then, like, who do you think is going to win in the next elections? LOL. Like, do you think you're going to win the debate? LOL. And it's like, that we're like, it's like a war right now, right? Like, there's like people like probably dying, like literally right now. It's like this is a real thing. Are you going to come to the inauguration? LOL. Like, I don't know. It just feels like it felt like a fucking meme. It felt like a meme interview to me. Yeah. Holy fucking shit.
Election is also that like thing about him being like the dictator, because I have been told so much, like by bots, by Russian bots, like by MAGAs, by all sorts of people, leftoids, like all sorts of people essentially, right? That repeat Russian propaganda one way or the other. They would be like, oh, you don't even have like democracy. I'm like, no shit, genius, Russian anger.
Breaking out the Dota 2 vocab, okay.
Yeah, it is the vocab, okay? I am from Kharkiv, okay? I am the poor Russian speaker that Putin came to defend. He defended my father spectacularly, okay? But point is that it's just so, like, obviously we want to, like, obviously we fought for that on Maidan, right? Me, personally, to have democracy, to have proper, like, you know, laws and institutions working. But it's not fucking our fault that Russia invaded us and we have to suspend all of that shit. Like why is it, how much money do you want to bet that Lex will not ask Putin about fucking him throwing people at the front?
Yeah, or that was my question was going to be like, are you going to ask Putin, hey Putin, when are you going to hold fair elections? Because I said I would walk back all of my criticism of Lex. If he actually asks those types of questions of Putin, I'd be like, you know what, fine, I'll give him a pass on it. If he would actually ask Putin, yeah, when are you going to, so people have accused you of like cracking down on freedoms a lot. What happened to Navalny? What was going on there? Yeah, but...
And all the other people, Nemtsov, who I got killed and shot and thrown. You know what, actually probably Lex shouldn't ask those questions because I don't want him to fly off the window, so...
Jeez, yeah.
Actually, when we were having the panel with Mercado, Andrew brought it up that his friend, journalist, actually tried to ask Putin some questions and was taken to another room and they beat him. That's pretty typical for Russia, but, you know, it's just... Lex shouldn't probably ask any provocative language or any provocative questions because it's fucking Russia, okay? You can get all sorts of shit happen to you, never mind the fact that it can just be used there, stuck there and used as a bargaining chip or some shit. Like, it's, you know, it's obviously they will have to coordinate every single fucking thing.
So like you don't believe in peace and love, but okay.
I mean, yeah, I believe in hate, apparently. Why hate when you can love, okay? Also, every time he said, I have a dream, I, like, died inside a little bit, but other than that... I like how Zelensky's like, listen, so this is for 15 minutes, like, right? This is why Minsk failed because this, and that. This is why the negotiations with Russia are useless. This is why the guarantees need to be like NATO because otherwise every other assurances we got didn't really give us anything because this, and that. Normandy, you know, with the first memorandum, like actual dates, actual like events, actual like, you know, facts and logic and facts, so to speak. And Lex then doesn't address any of that.
Or engage with anybody. Yeah, the lack of engagement on the questions was so fucking annoying.
And he's like a fucking NPC with a dialogue tree. He's like, I have a dream though, that you, Putin, and Trump will sit down and make peace. Every time, like literally every time. Also, people say he's not, doesn't know what he's doing, but I don't know if you noticed that, but I really noticed that. There was like this one moment when he asked about the most retarded question of the entire interview, in my opinion, was about Putin loving his country. And Zelensky, you know, kind of chuckled and then proceeded to say, like, how the fuck does he, where is his country, first of all? Where does it end? Where does it stop? Because he considers Ukraine his country, you know?
Yeah.
And second of all, like, he's thrown more than 500,000 people to fucking die in Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
And how the fuck is that love? And Chechen people that, hundreds of thousands of people that were butchered in 2 wars, like, how's that love? Exactly. Like, and he brings up all of that. And then he finishes Zelensky with the weakest point of everything he said prior, which was him not going to the front, not going to anywhere to Russia, not visiting like Russia, not even caring about it. But in Ukrainian, you can understand that he actually meant that Putin doesn't even give a fuck. He doesn't leave like Moscow or anything. All the like bumfuck.
Well, he did leave Moscow. He did leave Moscow once, remember? So,
well, Prigozhin, you mean?
Yeah, he did leave that.
Famous dictator, yeah. So the thing is, he brings it up, like, you know, that he doesn't really, and Lex launches into it. This last bit does not address Chechen thing, does not address throwing 500,000 people on the front, does not address, you know, anything, but addresses this last bit by saying, you know, I think Trump loves his country, but he hasn't been like everywhere. And you're like,
yeah, it's just stupid. It's just dumb. Like we have like limited time. Yeah, I don't know. It's whatever. It's dumb, but you know, yeah. Okay, there's a couple of things I have to run through. I have to leave like pretty soon because I have a dinner that I'm doing tonight.
okay, no problem.
No, are there any other big points you remember? What did you go over on the WIC panel that you thought was like the biggest stuff?
I mean, we mostly just talk about the you know, which points like we didn't really appreciate, and also we made some predictions about Putin interview. You know, it wasn't like that big of a, mostly it was a friendly because it was Dylan, me, and Andrew, and we were all like, you know, Ukraine dudes. So it wasn't really like Vic was the biggest like Lex fan there, but we, you know, tried to not to shit on him too much, obviously. And I'm glad it happened though. Yeah. So it's not like I'm against it. Yeah.
Do you think that Lex will actually get an interview with Putin?
Maybe, but kind of depends on how this whole situation goes. Like, I think they will look how this went, and maybe they will like his interview with Zelensky, who knows? But I think it would make sense for them to agree because he can just sit there looking profound and soulful and, you know, ask deep questions about Papa Putin and Mama Putin and his childhood or some shit. And, you know, it can be like all like that. And the problem with Putin, though, is that even if Zelensky asks him the softest questions imaginable, for example, like Tucker Carlson, right?
Yeah.
Tucker didn't ask like literally anything. Putin is still can go on his unhinged Rurik in 1918 rant, right? So he can still go about like the ancient history he made up and, you know, I just don't know how it will measure because whatever whatever you want to say about Zelensky, he came up, in my opinion, as a very human and like a real person, like, you know, approachable and kind of like likable, like, you know, like a person, right? With Putin is like a dead fucking shark, like he's like a literal ghoul. He cannot come off as approachable or like a relatable or like a real person at all. So I'm like, he doesn't even care about anything American, really. Like Zelensky at least spoke about like Trump, about fucking Elon, about lobbying. Apparently, MAGAs really liked that bit when he did.
Yeah, although Putin's in a weirder spot, I guess, because Putin's not even trying to appeal to the West. I guess he just needs to appeal to Trump personally somehow. So yeah, but
yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Also, one thing you said, I'm not sure exactly what you meant. You said like in the East, people are more pro-Russian, and they. What did you mean? You said like the.
Oh, I think isn't it like a higher concentration of Russian speakers, or a higher concentration of people with slightly more favorable views towards Russia in Crimea and then in Eastern Ukraine, and then as you go more west.
Well, they used to be.
Sure, yeah, I know those numbers have changed after the war has gone down, but
yeah. But there's like also another issue, like for example, before 22, I would say like with full chest, yes, even despite 2014. Crimea, definitely, most people are Russian there, you know, so it's, you know, another thing. But in Donbass, still the majority of people didn't want to, you know, go to Russia. There's no proof of that anywhere. And also they, of course, their opinion significantly fucking changed. In Kharkiv, for example, like people were more sympathetic to Russia. I wouldn't say they were like, you know, pro-Russian exactly, but a lot of people were like, yeah, well, yeah, Russia, you know, Russia's positive relations, right? And now it's like drastically fucking negative because we haven't slept for 3 years and we are bombed every day. So, you know, it's just kind of difficult to like them at this point, never mind the mass graves and all of that shit, which by the way Lex didn't ask about and of course didn't visit. In his video he visited Babin Yar, which is all right, you know, he's a Jewish person, so that's, you know, makes sense to visit. By the way, Russians fucking bombed Babin Yar, but he didn't say anything about it. The memorial to Jewish people who were killed by Nazis. He didn't say that Russians bombed it, but whatever, doesn't matter. He visited that, but he of course didn't visit mass graves in Izium or like in Bucha or some shit. You know, he didn't visit places where Russians committed crimes. He just went specifically to talk about the history of World War II, which is
least controversial. Yeah,
quite interesting. But yeah, well, anyway, you're right though. But because there is a problem, of course, because most people who escape now, like of the 10 million people, right, that are now not living where they used to, most of them left either to Ukraine, other parts of Ukraine, or they left to like abroad somewhere, right? Poland or some shit, you know, Germany, and things like that. So it leaves a problem, of course, of people who have stayed, why they stayed exactly, right? Some of them are just, you know, stubborn assholes that don't want to leave. Some of them were afraid to leave. Some of them couldn't leave because of the shelling, and there was no green corridors available because Russia wouldn't allow it. Or they're waiters, as we call them, right? So people who are waiting for Russia to win as well. So there's that. Also, Russians like brought up thousands upon thousands of people there already. They deported like 100,000 people from Melitopol and brought just about the same number of Russians there right now. We know that for sure. So that's the question as well. Like, what the fuck do you do with these motherfuckers? Like, you know, they're there already. Like, deport them or some shit. Like, it's quite difficult to think about it, but it's also stupid because we have to take that back first.
Yeah.
And then think about all of that, I suppose. But yeah, it's, you know, it's a situation, let's say. Yeah. Also, it didn't say a word about the fact that Zelensky brought up. How the fuck are we arranging elections without 10 million people being able to vote? Nothing.
Because of the people who are out of the country or whatever?
Yes, because 8 million are migrated, right? You have another a couple millions in occupation. You have also 1 million in the army right now serving. So how the fuck those people are going to vote exactly? Like we don't have like internet voting or anything, so you have to do this new whole thing, like new administrative thing, right, to make it work. And do I even want to? Like on one hand, sure, but on the other hand, maybe the new elected people will be shit, you know, at conducting war and diplomacy and things like that. And in times like this, I'm not like the biggest Zelensky simp on earth, to be honest, but I'm not sure I want someone else, because I know he's at least doing a pretty solid job of it, whatever you think of him, right? So that's a big risk. That is probably not the best time to take such risks. And to even, how do you even do it? Like, do you vote underground so they don't bomb people while they're voting?
Yeah, like, probably. I mean, there's probably a reason why elections can be postponed during wartime, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, like, man, seriously, it was annoying as shit, but I'm glad it happened. Because I think Zelensky did quite good, and I think it was a good showing. And apparently, MAGAs were very happy that he said Trump is strong and Kamala is weak, and, you know, they really love that part. So maybe that helped us. I don't know.
All right. Well, I will talk to you another day. Be careful. Stay safe. Okay.
Yeah. Bye.
Because there's no point in even wasting your time reading one line of a textbook unless we are going to study enough to actually do well on the final. It's like completely wasted effort. It's like, okay, I'm going to dig a well and the water is 100 feet deep. And if the water is 100 feet deep, there's no point in digging 5 feet down. It is literally a waste of effort. This is where a lot of people make a mistake. They think just get started. But if you really pay attention to yourself, we've given this advice to everyone. Not everyone is getting started. Many people are not getting started. Procrastination is getting worse, not better. Today, we're going to talk about how to short-circuit procrastination without really using willpower. Now, this may sound kind of weird because when we think about procrastination, we think like, oh, the way to overcome procrastination is discipline, willpower, maybe we need to work on our emotions. But if you understand the science of how procrastination works in the brain, and specifically we're going to be talking about working memory today. If you understand how working memory works, then we'll actually figure out a really interesting technique that can help a lot with procrastination. So let's take a look at procrastination and what goes on in your mind when you procrastinate. So here's you, and here's the task that you want to do. Here's the task that you should do. You should study, and then here's what you want to do. You want to play video games. I don't know about y'all, but right now I want to play video games. I could play some No Man's Sky. I could play some Dota. I could do anything except for make this video, okay? And so here's what we normally find, right? We're in this situation where there's a tension between these two things, and what we try to do is we exert willpower to try to push things in this direction, and we exert willpower to push things things in this direction. Or we'll use things like habits. We're kind of here in the middle, we're conflicted, and we'll do whatever we can to push things towards study. But then at some point, maybe this stuff will run out, and then we end up snapping back towards video games. So this is the first type of procrastination, right? But if we really look at our mind, what we find is it's not quite that simple. Because sometimes when you need to study and you end up playing video, and you think to yourself, oh, I shouldn't play video games because I need to study. What do you actually end up doing? You end up wasting some time on scrolling, right? And when we procrastinate, it's not like we just don't want to study. We also need to take out the trash. And then we also really should update our resume, right? And then it's not just video games and scrolling. Maybe it's a touch of porn. Watch a little bit of porno. So if we really look at the nature of procrastination, what we tend to find is that there tend to be a handful of things that we don't want to do, that we're procrastinating towards, and then a handful of things that we tend to end up procrastinating with. When people hear about our coaching program, their first response is usually, why would I work with another human being when I can watch YouTube videos all on my own? Working with a coach is about amplifying your time and effort. We're great at wanting things and even making some progress, but we usually struggle with follow through or have some kind of setback. And that's exactly where working with a coach can help. Coaches provide personalized support to help you set appropriate goals, make progress, and even work through setbacks. Just let us know what your goals are, what kind of support you're looking for, and we'll match you with the best coach for your unique needs. Check out the link in the description below to see if coaching is right for you. So if we look at the struggle of procrastination in our mind, it is basically a 3v3. So when you actually pay attention to how you procrastinate, you aren't actually thinking about the million things that you actually need to do, and you're not thinking about distracting yourself with all of the options, right? So if you really pause and think about it, there's a lot of stuff that you could do. You could go to the gym, you could order some stuff for a party, you could text people that you've lost touch with, right? You could even do 10 push-ups. You don't have to go to the gym, you just do 10 push-ups. There's lots of options. And there are also lots of things that you could avoid your tasks with. Like, it's not just video games, scrolling, and porn. You may be able to avoid by reading a book. You may be able to avoid by going for a walk. There's all kinds of options down here. But in our experience of procrastination, we don't think about those options. And the reason for this is because of something called working memory. So it turns out that because of our working memory, we are only able to hold a certain number of conflicts in our mind. And our working memory is only able to resist a limited number of things. So this is really important. Our working memory is only able to crave a limited number of things, right? So you can't use the sentence, I crave, period. That's not a sentence. Does that make sense? Crave requires an object. So I crave a pizza. I crave a donut. I crave love. I crave, I don't know, appreciation from other human beings. So craving and resistance in our mind are actually like highly specific and localized to what is in our working memory at the time. So we discovered this principle in addiction psychiatry. And once we started working with this principle of working memory, it turns out that we can teach someone who is like addicted to methamphetamine or crack cocaine or opiates or marijuana, we can use this principle to overcome the strong biological drive to engage in an addiction. And we use this technique very interestingly in a phase of something called motivational interviewing, which is an evidence-based technique that we use in addiction psychiatry, and we use it in something called the planning phase. So here's what we figured out. If you take a patient who, let's say, is addicted to alcohol, and they come into my office and I'm a psychiatrist, and I'm like, you know what? I'm a psychiatrist, trained at Harvard, man, come on. Listen to me, I have all the answers. We have MAT, medication-assisted treatment. We have psychotherapy, peer support. I will tell you, take this medication. Come to me and I will therapize you. And go to Alcoholics Anonymous and talk about your problems. If you do these 3 things, you will be cured. And then the patient is like, okay, doc. And then they proceed to do none of those things, right? So there is the ideal scenario which you are pushing them towards. They resist those particular things and they end up doing whatever the hell they want. So what did we discover in motivational interviewing? We discovered that the best way to start is not by telling them what they should do. Okay, so here's 2 ends of a spectrum. Let's take a look at this. So here's 2 ends of a spectrum of behavior: to drink or not drink, right? These are the 2 ends of the spectrum. And basically what happens is they have a lot of trouble avoiding this and they have a lot of trouble doing this. So when we think about procrastination, right, we're jumping between these 2 poles. Do I play video games or do I study? There's nothing in between. And now here's the problem, is to not drink invites the highest form of resistance and increases our chances of failure the most, right? And drinking is the easiest thing to do. So this requires 0 willpower. And so if we give in, then we're kind of screwed. It's very, very easy to play video games, right? It doesn't cost you anything. So the cost here is too high and the cost here is too low. So what do? We ask them, what can you do? We move somewhere over here, somewhere over here, somewhere over here, or somewhere over here. And most of the times when we procrastinate, we don't think to ourselves, oh, I need to study, right? What we actually think to ourselves, I need to study. And this is a very vague idea. What does study mean? Well, I have a final on Friday. So what does study even mean? We don't say to ourselves, I just need to study, period, right? The thought is unformed. Our working memory can only have so much RAM, so it doesn't think about what all the steps of studying are. We never say to ourselves, I'm going to study for 15 minutes. We never say to ourselves, I'm going to study for 30 minutes. We never say to ourselves, oh, I'm going to just finish this worksheet and then I play games. But then you will say, hold on, Dr. K, you're wrong. How so, dear listener? Well, sometimes I do say that. Oh, very interesting. And when you do say that, what happens? Well, I end up doing it more easily. And this is what we learned from motivational interviewing. That what we really want to do is, I'm going to boil this down to a principle: do the next best thing. What does that mean, the next best thing? If you can't do this thing, do the next best thing. If you want to bump it down 1 spot, go for it. If you want to bump it down to, oh, that's too much to do, then do 2 steps lower. Do the next best thing. And this is what we do in motivational interviewing. We don't tell someone medication-assisted treatment, Alcoholics Anonymous, and psychotherapy once a week. Twice a week if you want to get better faster. What we ask people is, what can you do? And when we procrastinate, we never ask ourselves, so recognize this. Procrastination is not about what you can do. It is about forcing yourself to do what you should do. But I want y'all to think about this for a second, because this is insane. You are not operating on what you are actually capable of. You are operating on wishes and hopes and dreams, not what you're capable of. So what do we want to do? We want to find all of these tasks in the middle, right? We want to think about all of these tasks over here. Okay, so if you can't drink, then what are we going to do? Okay, I'm going to avoid drinking today. Avoid drinking at the barbecue, okay? So for whatever you're procrastinating, give up on it. Don't do this thing. Try to figure out, what can you do? Okay, I can't take out the trash. Can you take all of the cups and glasses next to your computer and at least put those in the trash? Can you do this? What can you do? This is the main question you need to ask yourself. What can I get away with before I start scrolling? I'm going to at least take 5 cups to the sink before I pull out my phone, okay? So if you engage in this, what we know from evidence-based studies on overcoming addictions is that this is the right way to do it. So the way to get from, this is where we don't want to be, right? So I kind of flipped the axes last time, but this is bad and this is good. So what we want to do is find something in the middle. Now here's another really, really, really cool thing. So a lot of people will look at this and they'll say, oh, I've tried this before, and sometimes what I need to do is I need to move from bad to here. So let me do the smallest thing first, right? Let me just get started. There's this idea of getting started. All I need to do is get started. So it turns out that getting started is one of the worst things that you can do. Now you may wonder to yourself, hold on, Dr. K, what does that mean? Getting started is the worst thing that I can do. I thought everyone's saying all you need to do is just get started. There's some value to that, but here's what we learned from motivational interviewing. So remember that we're looking at state number 1 and state number 2, okay? Now here are the problems psychologically with getting started. If I tell you to get started, so you tell me, right? Because we've already figured this out. People have told you, oh, just get started. And you're like, yeah, that works some of the time. It works really well when I do it. Well, hold on a second. If it works so well, why don't you do it all the time? It's because getting started actually creates resistance. So if I tell you, oh yeah, like just take 1 cup and put it in the trash. And then what does your mind say? Your mind says, not enough, right? And now something really interesting is happening in your working memory. Your working memory, anytime it tries to give you a task, right, when it tries to get you to do something, it thinks about the outcomes. And I want y'all to answer a question for me. What is the point of doing something if it doesn't solve the problem? Like, so what is the point if I have a final on Friday? What is the point of reading 1 line of a textbook? My brain is actually going to say that is the biggest waste of time, because there's no point in even wasting your time reading 1 line of a textbook unless we are going to study enough to actually do well on the final. It's like completely wasted effort. It's like, okay, I'm going to dig a well and the water is 100 feet deep. And if the water is 100 feet deep, there is no point in digging 5 feet down. It is literally a waste of effort. This is where a lot of people make a mistake. They think just get started. But if you really pay attention to yourself, we've given this advice to everyone. Not everyone is getting started. Many people are not getting started. Procrastination is getting worse, not better. There's a second problem with just getting started, which is that you are actually capable of so much more, right? So if you can push yourself to get started, it's not like putting 1 cup away and 5 cups away is actually that much work, right? So if I tell you, okay, like what's harder, reading 1 line of a textbook or reading 5 lines of a textbook? And you're like, well, the pain in the ass is getting the textbook out and opening it. If I'm going to do 1, I might as well do 5. Now, when you do this, there's a very, very, very important cognitive difference. So the work of pulling out the textbook and reading 1 line is the same as the work of pulling out the textbook and reading 5 lines. The difference is that your dopaminergic brain and your nucleus accumbens and your working memory say that one gains more benefit than the other. So it actually increases motivation. So this is why in motivational interviewing, remember, what is the technique that we use? We say, do the next best thing. Don't do the first thing. Don't do the weakest thing. We don't tell people, let's start with the basics. Do the tiniest amount. Oh, for your addiction treatment, just do this. Just don't drink when you're in the bathroom today. We don't actually tell people to start with the smallest thing. What we ask people is, what can you do? So what we really want to do is not actually start at the beginning, because that does not give our brain a sense of enough gain from an action, right? Because there's a cost-benefit analysis. This is why what we actually want to do is be as close to this as possible. So if you can't do this, then can you do this? If you can't do this, can you do this? So this is why we tell people, what can you do? Well, I can not drink during the week. Well, holy crap. It's a good thing as a therapist that I didn't tell you just to drink today, because we would have lost so much ground. And so it is very inefficient to focus on just getting started. Instead, what we want to do, if this is too hard, no big deal. How much can we get, right? This is the gap that we want to try to cover. We want to try to maximize that gap as much as possible. So if you are procrastinating, you have to understand working memory. And if you understand working memory, then you will understand that there are actually many easy ways for you to do stuff. You just have to not fight the fight that is in your head. Because once your brain wants a particular thing and wants to avoid a particular thing, this conflict is kind of locked in, and we already know it takes a bunch of willpower to move from here to here. So instead, what we want to do is create option C, option D, option E, and those things won't have the same amount of resistance. And I don't know if y'all have experienced that, but that's just like true, right? So if I have a 5-year-old who's like, I don't want to eat broccoli, and I'm like, okay, how about green beans? They're like, I don't want to eat green beans. And I'm like, okay, how about radishes? I don't want to eat radishes. And it's like, well, what do you want to eat? I want to eat gummy bears. I want to eat cookies. Well, it's like, okay, well, what about an apple? Kid is like, I don't want to, but okay, fine. How about apples and peanut butter? Okay, fine. So if you've worked with kids or you've negotiated with humans, what you oftentimes find is that there's a lot of stuff that we're willing to do in the middle between what we should do and what we want to do. There's a big gap in there. The problem is literally our brain, our working memory, does not consider those possibilities. There's one last trick that I'm going to teach y'all to reset your working memory and help you with this. And that is literally walking through a door. So there's this really interesting neuroscientific or psychological principle called the doorway effect. And the doorway effect is the reason, I don't know if this has ever happened to y'all, but if you walk, if you're in a room and I'm like, oh, I need to go grab something. And then you leave the room and you walk over to the next room and you're like, I don't remember why I'm here. I forgot what I'm doing here. We'll like forget things, right? We forget things all the time. Oh, I have to go upstairs and I have to get a glass of water. I have to grab my toothbrush. I have to grab a change of clothing. And then you go upstairs. You knew the 3 things that you needed to grab, but when you go upstairs, you leave one room, you walk upstairs, you walk into another room. And what you tend to find is that your working memory literally resets. And this can be useful for resolving an internal conflict. So we can harness the doorway effect. So anytime, I have patients who are struggling with addiction, I strongly encourage them, or people who are procrastinating, take a walk and try to go through a couple of doorways if you can. So if you walk out of the door to your room and you walk out of the door to your house and you make one circuit around the block, you'll notice that your thinking will automatically change. If you are struggling to play a video game sitting in front of your computer and you literally go for one walk around the block, the struggle will feel very different. And that is literally because we are resetting your working memory. It's stuck in this like conflicted process that is hogging up all of your system resources. And the one simple way to turn it off and turn it on again is to go for a walk, to walk through as many doorways as possible. I guess if you've got a list of arches, that works too. So if you're struggling with procrastination, understand the science of working memory, understand the science of motivational interviewing, and start to harness those principles and make things way easier on yourself while you get way more stuff done. Hey y'all, hope you enjoyed today's video. We talk about a bunch of topics like this on the channel, so be sure to subscribe for more. If you're already subscribed, GG, and we'll see you in chat.
What does this have to do with friends? I think this is naive. I'm sorry.
Why is it not Putin's failures or Russia's failures to avoid war? Why is all of the agency placed on the victim here, the defender, right? These are the kinds of people that our country is supposed to exist for, and we failed. How are you as an American spread the propaganda pieces about Zelensky and his wife are shopping in New York? Where are Putin's videos of him being on the front line? Zelensky is like daily filming videos in places that people don't even know if it'll be under Ukrainian control in 2 or 3 days. Places that are actively being sieged or bombed.
I have never talked to Vladimir Putin, but I have a feeling he is ready. Because Donald Trump is ready. I hope you are ready.
Everybody's ready for peace but you, Zelensky. What's the Lex counter to that?
There were waves of Russian on the first day who said he ran away. I had to go out into the street. I left the office and went outside. I had to do this because I was showing that this was no green screen, you know, to show that it was the street, not some digital manipulation. I mean, I did these things, then I touched various objects. Now people might think that these are small things, but I was actually showing that I was in a real place. All of this had an impact. I was absolutely sure of my actions. And then I spoke to the Russians, I addressed Russians, I really did. And then only after that, I gathered, it was the first day when I invited all of the journalists here, wasn't it? To the press center in this building. I talked to journalists, I asked them not to leave because we needed weapons. At that moment, they were handing out rifles to people. And for me, journalists and media platforms were essential voices. There were various journalists from different countries here, and they were essentially stuck. And I asked them for contacts, those who had access to Russians, Belarusians, Kazakhs who understood everything, the same information. And I spoke to them. And I spoke to them and spoke in Russian. I told them, you must stop Putin. This is terrible. This is horror. This is war. You must stop him. And if you stand up now, if you speak out, and if you go out into the streets, this was very important. I spoke to them in Russian to show them that there was no problem and that all of these pretexts were made up. This is why it's so painful to talk about the Russian language too, because look, if the person does not want to listen, they will not listen, no matter what language we speak.
I disagree with you here. I think and hope that many people in Russia will hear us today.
They blocked YouTube recently. Are you aware of this? In their country.
I know. And I simply guarantee that this conversation will travel fast on the internet. Everyone will hear you. They will hear you. Including the president of Russia will hear you. This is why I have hope.
He is actually deaf, even if he speaks to you. He is deaf by his very nature. Do you understand the difference? You know, for instance, when you talk to Musk, you're talking to...
Jesus.
Talk to Musk. You're talking to an innovator, a scientist about rockets. You talk about how to save on costs and how they land. And on the other hand, Putin doesn't launch rockets to save money, but to kill people.
Is toxic positivity a thing? Because that's what I get from Lex in this convo. It's not like toxic positivity. You can be positive. I don't think you can be toxically positive. It's just that when you, sometimes it feels like people are being naively positive or obfuscating or equivocating. I think that's the issue. You can't just be glazing one side so fucking hard and then attacking the other side so fucking hard and then just saying like, oh, hope and love and hope and love. Okay, well, like, where's the criticisms for Putin? I never heard that Russia had blocked YouTube. I didn't even know that. Has Lex complained about that in any of his episodes? Maybe he has. I don't know.
People, do you think you can talk to Putin about technology? Your guys were interviewing him, and he told them about tribal history. Imagine a Russian man in his country listening to him. You know what Musk is about? Technology, Mars, artificial intelligence. And this guy Putin is standing there bare-assed, pontificating about tribes. You've got to understand. You think that when you do interviews, like Mr. Tucker, who did an interview there, that you're about to make them friends? How could you? What does this have to do with friends? He's different. He is simply different.
But it's still necessary.
A mammoth stands before you.
By the way, I must say that when you said bare-assed, it was not translated. Could the interpreter please translate?
This is so that you can understand.
Now he explained everything to me. I understand.
Yeah? That's
now
great.
I fully understand.
That's great.
But we still need to talk.
One should always speak with someone who listens. And you must speak when you know that this will benefit you, bring peace and calm to the world, not the other way around. I love President Trump's message when he speaks. I think that we share a position on peace through strength. That is very important. It means that if you are strong, you can speak. And we need to be strong. And Ukraine has to be strong. Strong enough. Otherwise, what for? So he, like Voldemort, who must not be named. Yes, he's like Voldemort. He thrives, subsists, and lives on being subjectivized. Instead of isolation, he is offered to step out into the light. He's darkness personified, and you offer him, as it were, to be subjectivized. Why? There's only one reason. Fear. And you say, we need to talk. Listen, we need to be in a strong position and not talk, but end the war. Yes, it is possible through dialogue. We're not opposed to it. You just need to be in a strong position to make the other person want it. Do you think he wants to end the war? That's what you suggested? I think this is naive. I'm sorry. With all due respect, it's naive to think he wants to finish the war. There's something we need. I think that President Trump not only has will, he has all these possibilities, and it's not just talk. I really count on him, and I think that our people really count on him. So he has enough power to pressure him, to pressure Putin not into wanting to stop it. No, he will not want to pressure him to actually stop it. That is the difference. Don't rely on his will, Putin's will to stop. You won't see it. That's what I think. Sorry.
No, sorry, I interrupted you first. But what I would want, I do have what some might call a naive dream of you sitting down with Putin and Trump and negotiating a deal about.
I had this like fear that when I went to debate Finkelstein, that Finkelstein and Rabbani would be bringing up all these like really deep historical events and I wouldn't know anything and I would just have to like appeal to like very broad, vague things because I just wouldn't be able to keep up in the convo. That was like my fear. Is this just going to be like Zelensky saying something particularized and something specific to Putin or a specific criticism and then Lex responding broadly with hope and love every single time? Is that what this whole thing is going to be? Remember, this guy's read tons and tons and tons of books. Countless books, he said, countless. There should be a plethora of deep, deep history that one could draw from to make, even in recent history, in terms of Ukrainian-Russian relations, post-91, pre-91. Okay, let's see.
Might call a naive dream of you sitting down with Putin and Trump and negotiating a deal about a ceasefire and together finding a path to long-term peace. And I think this requires strength, requires negotiations. There are a lot of carrots and sticks here that can be used to make a real deal. And Trump is very keen on making a deal and ready to negotiate.
Can I ask you a question?
What kind of deal? What kind of sticks? What kind of carrots? This is probably like, how many hours through this interview until Zelensky is like, I thought the first days of the war were the scariest, the hardest days of my life, but it's actually enduring this. It's actually not losing my shit in this conversation right here. Like what? It's okay. 53 minutes. Okay, maybe we'll get to somewhere.
Yep. I just really want you and I to be on the same page.
Yes. What is it going to be? Criticisms of like, can we please stop just saying peace and love for Putin, please?
It's very important to be in the same information space.
Yes.
Extremely important.
Not living different alternate realities, yeah.
Let's talk a bit about the ceasefire.
Okay, specifics?
Let me describe the situation to you.
Okay.
In December 2019, in Normandy, in Paris.
It's a conversation. This is why you don't want to watch it, because all you want to see is them debate shit. No, what I want to see is a substantive conversation, and I just want to see it. But I understand now what you're saying. Nobody actually wants to see it. You just want to see people that have impressive titles just sit here and just blah, 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 back and forth. That's all you want to see. You just want to see random, and then you can come away being like, yeah, I listened to the president of Ukraine and an American podcaster say these things. It's like, okay.
Paris, at the Élysée Palace, Macron, Merkel, Putin and I agreed on the ceasefire. The US wasn't there. And this, by the way, was a weak point of the meeting. If you'd like, we can later discuss why they weren't there. It's a security guarantee thing in general. It's Germany's position, etc. We agreed on an exchange of hostages, an all-for-all exchange. We made a deal to exchange everyone for everyone. I think you know that. And there was also a meeting that lasted many hours, a meeting where we made a deal with him. Everyone was tired. It was just the two of us in the end. And I proposed a ceasefire. By the way, no one in Ukraine believed. Few believed in the ceasefire, and he wanted troop withdrawal. I calculated that if there were a withdrawal of troops from the line of contact the way Russians proposed, it would take 20 years. I proved it to him, just in terms of time. Square kilometers, namely the length of the line of contact or delimitation line. And we agreed on what I told him, that it will not work out. But I had many points because I was deeply involved in the issue. I was involved very deeply. It's my thing in general. If I start doing something, I can't stand there like that guy I spoke about with my ass out, you know? I must be dressed. I must be prepared. I must be prepared better. Better than anyone in front of me. You do sports, right?
Mm-hmm.
I practiced for many years. And we know what fights are like, what boxing is, what Thai boxing is. This is what I did, and I loved it very much. When you step into the ring, you...
Destiny, when people have middle ground and understanding for each other, there is no... I hope that one day, I hope that when we do our civil war and shit, that your family is like being put up for whatever guillotine blocking, and there's like 7 of you, and they're trying to figure out like how many of you should kill, and one side wants to kill your whole family, and you're here like, oh no, like I don't want any of my family to be killed, and some guy comes up, and they're like, the middle ground, actually, we're just gonna kill 3.5 of your family members, and you're like, oh my god, bro, wow, what a middle ground. That's so peaceful. Good for you. Was it King Solomon, where there were 2 women that were arguing over a child that both claimed belonged to them, and King Solomon in his wisdom was like, you know what, let's just cut this motherfucker in half, and we'll give each half to one mother, and then everybody's happy, right? And I know you're American too, and that's what hurts even more, because only an American can say something that retarded. Holy shit! My god, the people in my country, kill me!
You understand everything, pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
And so I stepped into it, and I was
They shook hands after the Civil War for a reason. They shook hands after the South was crushed and then reintegrated back into the United States when the Confederate States of America was destroyed and ceased to exist. They shook hands and then, yes, reintegrated back into the United States of America proper. Correct. Yes.
Definitely well prepared. But he wasn't. No. He was not deeply involved in the process. What border? Where is it? How long will it take to disengage troops? And why wasn't he involved? You want to know? Because he wasn't going to do any of this. This is what confused me. If you are not deeply involved in the issue, well then it's as if you don't really need the result. That's what I think. So what happened? We agreed that there will be gas continuation, gas transit. In 2019, we agreed with him. This was the security for Europe. Merkel, asked me for it. And this was extremely important for Germany. We agreed with him. Secondly, we agreed that for him it was just money. So secondly, we agreed on an exchange. For me, this was the most important thing. For them, gas was. For me, was the people. And this is a fact, because I wanted to have a humanitarian advantage so that there would be further meetings that would lead to sustained peace. And third, ceasefire. Ceasefire you spoke about. What happened? The gas contract was signed because he needed it. And by the way, he knew
To give a small ounce of benefit of doubt to Lex, Zelensky talks pretty long segments, and although seems to ask direct questions to Lex, plus, given the big delay and loss in translation, seems like it's a bit hard for Lex to jump in and have a back and forth convo without seeming to interrupt rudely. Obviously still wish Lex didn't just ask naive questions and actually dig more into the substance. Okay, I don't speak Russian or Ukrainian, so it's hard for me to know how good Lex's Russian is. But if you're not, like, if you are fluent in a language, the way that your mind searches for words is a lot different. There's a difference between, like, having an idea and expressing the idea versus, like, not even being able to think in the language, but having to hear them say something in that language, translated in your mind from the language to English, think of the idea in English, and then, like, I don't believe that you can have a fluent conversation. You can't have a real conversation like that. You can't do it. Even in the very, very, very rudimentary Spanish that I know, like when I'm listening to things and I'm hearing it in Spanish as a non-fluent speaker, when I hear, I have to try to translate it back to English, and then I have to try to translate it back to Spanish in my mind, and then speak the most basic bitch fucking present tense infinitive version of verb language that I could possibly do. There's no possible way you could have a serious, in-depth conversation involving emotion, involving different verb tense, involving higher level abstract concepts. You just can't do it, right? So in that case, don't do it in these languages. Now, I don't know, maybe Lex's Russian is good enough to do that, okay? That's one, okay? But number two, when you talk about Zelensky speaking a lot, okay? He's giving long answers, all right? The frustrating thing about most people that speak a lot is they say so much when they could have just said it in 1 or 2 sentences. It's not very information dense. It's just a lot of like, okay, we get it. You can fucking yap, okay? Zelensky is a guy who was, among so many other things, an actor turned president of a corrupt country turned military leader in one of the most unprecedented conflicts in the past 3 decades in Europe, and has done an admirable and a commendable job in leading his country through that. And when he is speaking about things that's going on, this is like very information dense stuff. There's a lot of stuff that you could dig into here. He's not just yapping, right? So far we've gotten an interesting perspective on ceasefire talks. We had a conversation that he had with the leader of Belarus. The entire concept of how important it was to control like the flow of information. This is something that other people around the world have learned during conflict, that it is incredibly important to keep lines of information. These are all like, there's like, in terms of just what he's talked about, like in 1 hour, right? This is an incredibly dense, I'm sorry, not in 1 hour, in like 50 minutes or 45 minutes, because there's a 10-minute introduction from Lex. There's a lot of stuff that Zelensky's given here. Like, it would be interesting to hear more on any of these particular things, but the only engagement has just been peace and love and hope, and that's just very annoying, I think.
The gas contract was signed because he needed it. And by the way, he knew everything about it. As for exchange, we took the first step and exchanged the people. Regarding the ceasefire,
I think the silver lining is that the lack of pushback and any kind of substantive critique from Lex will help further Zelensky's cause and make more people support Ukraine. Hopefully, maybe. I don't know how much this weird, bizarro format is going to inhibit people's engagement with this. But like, this would be such a fascinating time for Lex to present, like, the counter arguments. Like, why didn't you guys just give in immediately, or why didn't you agree to peace, or how, and maybe they're coming, you know, later on down the road, because there is so much misinformation. We got into a little bit of it, like that you banned Russian, didn't you? Right? I don't know, but we're only 45 minutes in. We'll see more.
They started killing us in about a month, so I called him and I told him, We agree.
It would be very easy for Trump to pivot on Ukraine. Agree or disagree? Agree 1,000,000%. Trump can pivot any which way in Ukraine because nobody knows anything about it. Nobody really cares about it in the United States. And Trump doesn't know anything about it or really care about it. Trump could pivot either way, like 100%. Trump could be Ukraine's greatest ally. Trump is retarded enough that he could call in like a no-fly zone at U.S. airstrikes into Moscow and not even realize what the f he's doing. Like, it's...
Agreed on a ceasefire, didn't we? Well, it wasn't a piece of toilet paper, was it? This is serious business. Or so it seemed. It really was serious.
Not defending Lex, it is kind of just Lex's style from what I've seen. Very much open questions and letting the interviewee soapbox. Am I the only person on the entire internet who's aware of like what his audience thinks and doesn't like it when his audience thinks things that are super in contrast to what I believe? Is there a single other person on the internet that does that? I don't understand this. If I were to do a video, if I were to give a take, and like when we argue about the Luigi healthcare assassinator guy or the Trump firefighter guy or whatever else, and I see where I'm saying things and then my audience is like dramatically out of step with my belief, the inclination that I have is to fight with my audience or to figure out like, well, why do we believe in different things? How many of you do I need to ban? Just kidding. Like what's going on here? I couldn't imagine having so much of my audience believe a thing that I proclaim not to believe in. So when Lex is saying things like, I believe both sides need to do peace and blah, 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 but his audience is very clearly, massively far-right, far-Russian captured, does that not bother him? Or does that not irritate him? Or, like, how can you not... There has to be something going on there that I don't understand. I don't know. Don't know.
But was it? This is serious business. Or so it seemed. It really was serious. Merkel, Macron...
Like, you guys keep falling for this stupid shit. Lex said people believe speaking Russian is banned, didn't he? He didn't outright say he believed it was true. Yeah, but he's repeating these are the things that his audience believes. And he's probably more favorable to that than not, although I would have to see specifically if he's tweeted about this or said it, but...
A ceasefire is important, isn't it? Not for New Year's, because everyone was celebrating New Year's. And now they're offering us a Christmas ceasefire. It's all the same. A ceasefire for 2-3 days just to get some praise. But this isn't a performance. This isn't some kind of theater. No, this is about people's lives. And that's what happened. After that, I called him a few more times. I think I only had 2-3 calls with him in total. I asked him for a ceasefire. He told me it couldn't be. We will figure it out now. People from the occupied territory, Russians and separatists, they were all there together. They continued to shoot and kill our people. Yes, the front lines were quiet, but they killed people. They were killing people, and I kept calling him. I called again and again, but there was nothing. Until, after a few months, the Russians stopped answering the phone. We did not have any contact since. I wanted another meeting, like we had in Normandy. I wanted the next meeting. I wanted to find a solution, but the Russians refused. We tried to make it happen through various European countries, and not only European, but the Russians refused.
Like, the real test is going to be, what is it? There's something that, God, I read that one thing and it's like, it's lived in my mind forever, and I understand this so much better now. The ground that you meet for a conversation on is so, like, it controls everything in such a hard to understand way that, like, if I'm bringing you to a conversation and the assumption is, like, you guys are the one that need to find peace, you guys are the ones that are kind of like provoking the war, you guys are the one that like need to figure out how to end this. Why does it start there? Why is it not Putin's failures or Russia's failures to avoid war? Why is all of the agency placed on the victim here, the defender, right? But who knows, maybe his conversation with Putin will be...
Passed along some kind of bullshit, made excuses, they didn't want it. Meanwhile, they were sending their snipers. We had evidence, living proof, even video evidence, because some of them were captured back then. Those were the snipers in training. They were training them. And later those snipers operated in Syria and Africa. These snipers were training in our country, in the East.
Like, one question I would have is, like, were you ready to die for Ukraine? Like, were you planning on, or what was the conversation like? Were you expecting to be executed a month into the war? Because my understanding, I could be wrong, but in the first couple months of this war, when everybody expected Ukraine to fall in 2 weeks, I don't think he ever fled Ukraine, right? I don't think he fled Kiev at all, right? I don't think he did. Didn't he? He was just there the whole time, right? Against an enemy to where... like, would anybody have even judged him if he would have left, like Zelensky flees Ukraine into Europe, I don't even know if anybody would have been like, wow, what a loser. Like, I think it would be like, yeah, obviously he's fleeing. It's fucking Russia's going to take over his fucking country. Yeah, and then there was the, because I think the U.S. offered to evacuate, and then there was that headline. Zelensky refuses U.S. offer to evacuate, saying, I need ammunition, not a ride. Because I think he said he needed more shells or something instead. These are the kinds of people that our country is supposed to exist for. Like, we are the most incredible force multiplier, or should be, for these types of people. And we failed to answer our call for that.
Good morning, Ukrainians. Currently, there are a lot of games appearing on the internet. Like that I'm asking our army to put down arms and evacuate. So I am here.
Like, how do you even, like, it's such a propaganda war that Russia somehow still won? How are you as an American, like, how dare you spread the propaganda pieces about Zelensky and his wife are shopping in New York, right? Where are Putin's videos of him being on the front line? Meanwhile, Zelensky is like daily filming videos in places that people don't even know if it'll be under Ukrainian control in 2 or 3 days, or places that are actively being sieged or bombed, or attacked or infiltrated with assassins, or like nobody knows anything. And Zelensky's out here like posting videos of all this shit. Meanwhile, here's a question. Did Putin flee? Putin never fled Moscow when Petrovsky, I'm just putting random fucking Russian sounding syllables. Who's the meme guy? Did he flee Moscow when that guy was going north? Did he flee? He did? Like, that's unbelievable. How unbelievable. Did he actually? Putin flees Moscow. During this mutiny. Like, unbelievable. He flew to St. Petersburg? Unbelievable. Tucker said Zelensky gets no points because the leader is expected to be on the front lines. Trump wouldn't even join his marchers on January 6th. What a loser. God, our country's so pathetic right now.
Ukrainians were living targets. They were shooting from the other side, killing people, women, people, children. They were shooting. It was a hunt. By the way, it was in the Russian-speaking region, in the east, where, according to him, everyone is speaking Russian. That's where they were shooting, where the situation currently is the most tense. They killed people. We sent this information, sent pictures. We sent them to the UN, sent them everywhere. We worked very hard, very persistently. I met with everyone. But who thought of Ukraine back then? They didn't notice it much. They didn't pay much attention to Crimea being illegally occupied either. And to be honest, the United States of America too. Everyone was somewhat silent about this issue. That's how it was. It was like that before a full-scale war. I want to ask you a question about the ceasefire in Mariupol today. There are American and Ukrainian journalists, and everyone.
The commander-in-chief needs to stay safe. So just my understanding is based on what he said. It sounds like in Ukraine, his position is also the commander-in-chief as well. He called it the supreme commander. That was the translation. It sounds like that their leader has the same role.
There are American and Ukrainian journalists, and everyone will tell you who had contact.
They mocked Romney for saying that Russia was a threat way back then, because Russia is not a threat militarily, and Russia is not a threat physically to the United States. Russia is only a threat insofar as they have become a schizophrenic voice in the American mind. That's how Russia is the threat.
In Mariupol today, there are American and Ukrainian journalists, and everyone will tell you who has contact now with Mariupol, who fled from there in the last minutes just before the occupation, or who was able to leave, to escape after the occupation. Chernov, who won an Oscar, was among them. And the journalists that left Mariupol, they are here. By the way, we had a conversation. They will tell you that 20,000, 30,000 civilians were tortured and buried there. We do not know the number of victims. People who didn't want to work with them, who refused to cooperate with them, people who went on strikes to protest, people who did not want to work with the Russians who occupied Mariupol. And this is one example, just with this city. And I have a question for you. What about the millions of children? And I will ask you in Russian so that you hear this without delay. What about the millions of children over there? What if we just arranged a ceasefire without understanding what would happen next? Without understanding What will happen to Ukraine's security guarantees? What about the millions of children in the occupied territories? What should I tell them? What am I to tell them? What is it I should tell them? What? Whatever?
Republicans and conservatives are the weakness that drags the United States down. Yeah, I would say MAGA, but when I talked to the Keys guy, Lichtman, he just hated the Republicans, period. He said it was way more than MAGA. And having dug back the last, like, 3 decades, I think I kind of agree.
Hey, all of you over there, see ya. And those tens of thousands of people buried there, they were, is that what we want? Are we ready to forgive them for this? We must at least take the first step. If this is a ceasefire, we must know that there is a security guarantee for the part of Ukraine under our control. We need it